Welcome to another Paper Street Pictures Roundtable. I am your host, the Cinemechanic, and today I am joined by some very special people. Shawn, who's a director of new media at Paper Street and the co-host of the Paper Street Pictures podcast. We have Britney Salyer, who is a projectionist and a pro wrestler, as well as Michael Marisi, who is a film and comic book writer. All of their socials will be left in the description of this video. How is everybody doing today?
Good.
I'm excited.
Ready to talk about Batman?
My favorite topic. You can't see it, but you can kind of see there's Laura Palmer, but underneath Laura Palmer is Batman and Robin from the 60s television show.
Oh, nice. Just noticed that. Yeah, your back wall is kind of like the Usual Suspects, where you kind of have to like look really closely to see.
It's all Fantastic Fest posters, pretty much.
Nice. Not in my one representation here with the Flying Graysons.
Nice. I see that.
Yeah, I wanted to start out with the director who introduced me personally to the Batman universe, and that's Tim Burton. And I wanted to talk about starting with, there's other Batman movies before that, but I wanted to start with Burton because really in terms of the modern day, I think his interpretation is probably the most interesting to me. My introduction to the character was through the Tim Burton original 1999 movie. I remember that movie very vividly in terms of really the marketing campaign. Movie marketing campaigns at that point, they've been pretty prolific, and they were, the machine had been pretty well oiled. That movie was marketed in a way I had not seen before. That movie marketing campaign bludgeoned you into going to see that movie. It was everywhere. And I remember being introduced with just seeing the bat symbol. I think I can't remember the movie I went to see, but in the lobby, they had the poster, but it was just the bat symbol, no Batman, no title, no nothing. And I remember looking at that and it looked familiar, but it also, if you looked at it a certain way, it almost looked like somebody's like tonsils or something. Like it was like an open mouth. And I just couldn't tell. I was like, is that the bat or is that, what is that? And that it made you curious. So the marketing campaign for that was just insane. I mean, it was like Warner Brothers was just going to force you to go see that movie. And that's what happened. Everybody was talking about it, adults, kids. And I remember when it came out, I was begging my dad to take me, and we couldn't go until, I think it came out Wednesday. Did it come out Wednesday or Friday? I can't remember.
I believe it was a Friday in June.
Okay. If it was Friday, I think we couldn't go that Friday. We had to go the Saturday. But I remember a kid down the street that I knew had gone to see it Friday, and I was so jealous. Mm-hmm. And I tried to avoid that kid because I knew he would try and spoil it for me. So I was like hiding in my house because I didn't want to go outside because I knew he'd be gloating about the fact that he got to see it before me. So anyway, we went to the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, California. It's like right next to Lake Merritt. It's like a movie palace. We went, and I want to say it was a great experience seeing it the first time, but it kind of wasn't because there was this kid sitting in front of me and my dad, and he was with his dad, and the kid kept spoiling the movie. He kept spoiling it. Every time something big would happen, okay, he would say, this is when the Joker is going to do this, and this is when Batman's going to do that. He did that for the entire movie, and I was so mad. I love the movie. I mean, I watched it, and from what I did see, I loved it, but it's just that experience was tainted by that kid. So the next time I saw it, which was, I think it might have been the next weekend, I got a much better, clear picture of it. But yeah, the marketing for that was insane. It was all over the place. Boxes, t-shirts, billboards, movie, or what do you call it, buses, bus stops. What do y'all remember about that time in 88, 89 when that movie was ramping up?
I may jump in first because I think I'm the eldest here that might have a clear memory. I was 10. I was 10 in 1989, and that movie was, I said offline before we jumped in here, but that was my Star Wars. Like that was, and the marketing blitz, as Farrell alluded to, is kind of the point. My birthday was that May, and like I got nothing but stacks of things with the bat symbol on it. They had already gone into a full blitz like before summer, leading up to it. And then yeah, that very memorable gold emblem that was just the poster teaser. I was like Farrell, I had a terrible experience because my buddy and I looked forward to it all week. And then my father took he and I to the movies. And this is long before you realize like, oh, stuff could sell out. that movie was a huge hit. It was sold out the entire day, so we had to like go home and sit the entire
Oh
night
man,
mad about it and go early the next morning and see it that Saturday. So yeah, it was it's one of those things. But I do believe I saw it like the following 2 weekends. It was one of those things where we went back, and that might have been the first time I'd ever done that for a theatrical thing as a kid. But yeah, it was it's funny, we talk about now, the word is that how dark it was, and how like Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, as Michael might know, like really made a concerted effort to darken him up after the 60s kind of almost ruined the reputation of Batman being dark. And we don't want every superhero to be dark, but a lot of us do like our Batman dark.
Yeah.
In hindsight, the gothic Burton one looks campy now, 30 plus years later, but like at the time, it obviously was such a change of pace from people who only knew the 60s version. But some of it still holds up. I mean, that aesthetic like permeated the look of Gotham, into the animated series and for another decade or two. So like it still resonates what Burton did. I think you could tell by part 2, like he was less interested in Batman and more interested in the wacky villains. And that's been an issue, kind of lingering issue on several Batman movies. But I still hold the first 2 that he did near and dear myself.
Yeah, I can jump on that. I was 5 when the first one came out, so I don't remember. And also, let me just say that this movie was not particularly marketed towards me, which should be completely false, because I loved every day after school I would come home and watch and would record with my VHS tape reruns of the 1960s Batman. And I loved all forms of Batman. I was so excited that he was dark, because my first introduction to him was all happy and nice, and like literally after school programming for Britney was, I would have these little taquitos and I would just watch Batman from the 60s, and I loved it. I will say though that you mentioned like this being your Star Wars. I feel like honestly for me, Batman Returns was like my personal Star Wars as a kid, because I had seen the first movie and I liked it or whatever, but like as a young lady, I was so excited when Catwoman was going to be in the second one. Like that's when like all the marketing comes into sharp focus for me, where I remember the first time I saw the trailer and she's like backflipping, and I'm like, oh my God. And of course now all latex and like watching it now as an adult, it's like, one, I can see so much of my stylistic choices, how it permeated my little child brain. But two, like what you talked about, like wacky villains, like that movie is so unmarketable. Like it is dark but campy, and it's so many things it shouldn't be. Like I feel like the first one was a little more straightforward, and then the second one was just completely off the rails. Like how do you market a penguin who bites the nose off of someone, to children? But yet I bought the book, the motion picture book, and like had all the figurines and stuff like that. The first one, I think for me, is that like the thing that always lingers for me is just one, the darkness. That was the first time that I was introduced to a darker Batman, and I love that. And I love what you said about like, all our superheroes don't need to be. First of all, I don't think Batman's a superhero, so that's one thing. Second of all, I want my Batman to be dark for sure. Because I think that was what attracted me to the character to begin with anyway, was this kind of tortured soul. And I know we'll eventually get into the new one, but I think they hit on that really well. What else was I gonna say? Yeah, just Batman Returns. Like, Burton, like to this day, I love like that, the Art Deco kind of Gothic architecture and everything, which his Gotham to me is what I loved most about those movies. Was his Gotham was it was fantastical, but relatable at the same time. And like, it really just felt like I was being transformed, or, like transported into a different world when I was going to that Gotham City. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, is like lingering things. It's just the production design, the sets, and yeah. And then Batman Returns, I kind of loved all that goofy weirdness, but still really dark.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Batman Returns exists is a gift unto itself, because that movie is nuts. I watched it again like 2 weeks ago, and I was like,
so great.
It's so great. I mean, I love those two. I actually love Batman Returns more than the original. And it's like, this is a movie about 3 deeply disturbed cosplayers working out their shit violently in the public sphere, you know, like, and the public and the audiences ate it up, you know, like it's bonkers that that movie was so successful. But it did have a backlash. I mean, we can talk about this later, because Batman Returns is what it begot Batman Forever, unfortunately, and that goes in a whole new direction. We'll talk about, you know, when we get to the Schumacher stuff. But like, you know, Farrell, you mentioned something really important with the poster, just the Batman symbol. And what I think I love, and I'm sure we'll have this discussion throughout our conversation, is the realism aspect of how much or how little, you know, directors, filmmakers are embracing that idea of realism. And what's so cool is that, like, what I love about the Burton movies is that iconography. Like, he made this, and this is like obviously a pre-MC world, pre-template. I mean, I think DC is still better at having visual flair and better at having flexibility on where they can go. They're not tied to like this single story and universe. But back then, like, it was just like, it was a tabula rasa for what you can do with a superhero movie. And Burton took this and made that iconography real. You know, that the symbol, the bat symbol, is just indicative of what Batman is. It's all iconic. It's the bat symbol. It's the thing, you know, the bat symbol in the sky. It's the Batmobile. All this great iconography that he put in every single frame of the movie is just dripping with iconography, from the Art Deco, like you said, to the to the overall atmosphere noir. And it's funny because as visually stunning as Batman 89 is, I think Returns is even better. Like, there's just another layer of visual texture. Like, I think the cinematic language is even stronger. The subtext of repression and you know, domination, stuff like that that's going on in that movie. That's all very themes for the family. But like, the visual language is even stronger in Batman Returns, but it's just, everything is so iconic in those movies and so big. And I remember seeing those and just, you know, maybe not, obviously not as consciously as I do now, but falling in love with it for that. You know, I remember having, I don't remember when I saw it there. I know I did, but I don't have many memories of that. My memory, and Shawn, I bless you for thinking you're so much elder than me. I appreciate but I remember the VHS, because I mean, that was a time when VHS, you know, home purchases were still relatively new thing. So like actually owning a VHS tape was like a thing, was like a big deal. And I had that, and it was just the bat symbol on it. And I watched that thing and I wore it out, you know, I wore that tape out. And that's what Burton, like I said, did so well, that I loved, is this taking Batman, you know, not that Batman was entrenched in realism, you know, Batman in the 60s, he certainly wasn't, but this is a new kind of escape from realism with this style that he put into it. And it's just, it hasn't really been rivaled. I think the Batman does some cool stuff, and we'll get to that later, but like, you know, these two movies really did something unique, and that hasn't been duplicated since.
Yeah, they did a good job of like melding like the fantasy with the reality.
Mm-hmm.
He had cool gadgets and stuff, but he wasn't completely crazy. It didn't feel like a world we actually lived in, but the things he were doing were all kind of like possible in a way. You know, he wasn't flying, I mean, outside of, you know, with his wingsuit, but that kind of made sense, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then just
I wanted to touch on something that y'all were mentioning about Burton in terms of the stylistic thing. I think that his two movies did something that none of the other Batman movies did, which they kind of switched genres excuse me, between the two films. Because I think the first Batman, his original Batman, is more of a film noir, and Batman Returned is more of a sort of a gothic kind of thing. Because if you watch the original, it really does feel like a film noir with Batman in it. There's a moment where I think, was it Jack Napier's like girlfriend or something? No, it was the crime boss's girlfriend comes in, and Jack Napier's there, and then he's like, hey, can you wait in the other room? There's a saxophone that plays during that sequence, and it plays in a way that it's reminiscent of a film noir. So, but when you get to Batman Returns, it feels much more like some, almost like a gothic horror movie. So Burton, I mean, when people think of Batman, Burton's movies, they think of sort of one thing, but it's the two movies are very different. And I think in the second movie, excuse me, he was more unleashed in terms of what he wanted to do. That I thought that was really fascinating, and because I don't really see that with the other Batman interpretations. You know, with the Schumacher stuff, they're both pretty much very similar. Batman Robin is quite a bit sillier than Batman Forever. Nolan's films are pretty consistent throughout, and yeah, like Snyder, same deal. We've only seen one Matt Reeves movie, so we don't, exactly what he's going to do with that. But I thought that was fascinating with the Burton movies, how they switch genres, midway.
Yeah, I mean, like it's kind of goes to like how things were just much more flexible, then. I would love to have seen the third, which seemed more of like, from what we understand, with Two-Face and more of a crime thriller, I guess, if Burton had made a third, which we never really got. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's like a testament. I think that's what you're allowed to do when you're building. How do I frame this? Like Batman, I think Brittany, I think you mentioned like that Batman is less of a character in Batman Returns, which is true. And you see more of like just Gotham as a character, and like there's all sorts of different parts of Gotham and different moving pieces within it, like from the mogul of Christopher Walken, I forget his name, to
Max Schreck, yeah.
Max Schreck, yeah. So Max Schreck, his son, everything that happened with Penguin. The city itself, the way that Burton made Gotham so big and so specific is that like there's all these different things going on within the city, and then Batman just kind of, you can drop him into these different things that are happening, where I feel like in the Nolan movies they really try really hard, and it's something I don't really like, and they did in the Batman 2, where like everything that happens like it's a reaction to Batman, which I'm just not a fan of. I don't think everything has to happen because like, ooh, Batman, you inspired me. It's like, okay, I guess. I mean, it feels kind of cheap, but like in Batman Return, in either Burton movies, you don't really get that. You don't really get the thing that like these things exist because Batman exists. It exists because of what Gotham is. And that's why you could have done that for a longer time, Farrell. Like if you kept that what it was, like you can have the noir, you can have the horror, gothic horror, you can have the crime thriller, etc., because of what he made the city and what he made Batman.
Yeah, and today you get, studios, when you're sort of dropped into that studio environment in today's climate, it's much more about you're sort of fulfilling the studio's vision, whereas, that's not the case 100% of the time. But back in the day, I think they were a little bit more flexible in terms of, okay, let's get Tim Burton in here, let's Burtonize this movie, you know what I mean? Like, and he did that. I feel like the second movie that he did is a lot more Burton, which is why I love it. I think it's less of a Batman movie, more of a Burton movie. I think it's Burton working out things, all of his quirks and, things he was trying to say. And I think that's great. The original Batman feels a little bit more like a studio movie, where Burton was just sort of, I don't want to say hired hand, but you could tell that there were some studio things going on that made it, you could feel Burton fighting the studio when you're watching the movie. And I was reading some behind the scenes stuff on that, and he did really have a tough time on that shoot. There were times where he got really frustrated with the producers, and they were trying to, I love Prince, but I don't think that's something that Burton originally wanted. I think that was more of a sort of a John Peters decision. I think he and like Nicholson had gone to a Prince concert in the middle of shooting, and they were like, hey, let's get some Prince songs in here. It was just kind of a random, and to be fair, I think Prince did a really admirable job. I watched a couple of his music videos, Bat Dance and Party Man, last night, and I said, man, I do remember seeing those music videos at my friend's house because Batmania was going on, and they came on, I think it was MTV or something, and we were just gobsmacked because it was like, Prince is mixing so many different musical genres, just like Burton kind of was switching genres between movies, and he made it work in his own Prince way. But again, it does not feel like a decision Burton would have made, as much as I love Prince and I love his interpretation of the Batman stuff. But yeah, I think that Burton was living in a time where he could sort of go buck wild with that stuff. And I think the movies are better off for it. There are some things about modern Batman movies that I don't really align with. And I think it does come from this push towards a sort of sophisticated realism, which I'm on the surface a fan of, but it just depends on the character you're doing it to. And we'll get into that later, but I did want to talk about Michael Keaton. Because Michael Keaton, was not everybody's first choice. I mean, this is kind of a common thing, like Robert Pattinson, when he got cast in the Batman, people are kind of like, oh, what's going on there? But Keaton was the origin of that, because when he got announced, people were writing letters to the studio saying, hey, if you do this, if you go ahead with this casting choice, we're going to boycott the movie. And it wasn't until that first trailer where people saw what Keaton was doing, and everybody shut up, because Keaton, what he brought to that role was great. He was a comedic actor at that point, but I think he had done a couple serious roles, but he was Mr. Mom. He was the kind of the goofy comic guy who's like, limping, and he's got a vacuum cleaner in one hand and a baby in the other. And this guy's going to be Batman. Like, who made that decision? But when I was younger, I was not aware of this, because I'd seen some Keaton movies, but I just was not aware of the whole, oh, he sucks and we don't want it. It was just more like, I saw that trailer, I was already hooked. I'd seen the marketing. So when I saw that first trailer, I was like, oh, it's Bruce Wayne. It's great. And he did a great job. But what I really think he brought to the table that other Bruce Wayne's, other actors who played that character didn't, was a kind of levity. In a weird way, he was dark, but he was also, you could see how the darkness was sort of brimming under the surface, and on the surface, you could tell he was struggling. With other Bruce Waynes, it always felt like they were sort of playing it straight, which, God bless him, man. I think a lot of the other interpretations are very valid. I think they're very good acting choices by these other actors, but I think Keaton in particular brought a sort of a psychological complexity to the character that I thought was fascinating. I think that only comes from the fact that he was a comedic actor, and a lot of comedic actors and a lot of comics in general are just dark. I mean, they have
Very dark.
The reason they get into comedy is because they have so many demons, so they have to exercise those demons in some fashion. So they use comedy, and I think Keaton was able to tap into that darkness in a way that just made sense for the character, because that's what the character is. He's this guy kind of dancing on the razor's edge. So I don't know. What do y'all think of Keaton in terms of like him bringing his Keatonness to the Batman role?
I like his Bruce Wayne a lot. And for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, just some of the complexities to the role of, like, he's kind of got an ease and a charm and a suave to him that goes to that billionaire playboy idea we have of Bruce Wayne, or like that kind of got started around Bruce Wayne. But it's not so flamboyant, and like, I don't know, it's not stereotypical. Like, you can see that he's just a charismatic guy. He's not necessarily driving around in Ferraris or Lamborghinis as he does later on in Nolan's movies. And he's like, he has a depth of thought, and you can see that mostly in the acting. There's not a lot of it expressed necessarily in dialogue, but you can see it through Keaton just being Keaton, like these moments where you can see that he's having moments of turmoil and things like that. He's not so polished when he's Bruce Wayne that, everything's fine. And just even like the gazpacho scene, just like, he's kind of not refined. Sorry, that's just him spitting out his gazpacho because it's cold. And so he's just a little more, I don't know, relatable, unless oftentimes I feel like the Bruce Wayne and the Batman are so different that it doesn't even make sense a lot of times. And I thought he did a really good job of kind of bringing those together. Like, I felt his Bruce Wayne more than his Batman was fine, but he was my personal favorite Bruce Wayne, and that could also be because he was the first one I was really introduced to, but also just because I feel like he wasn't like super hot, but he was charismatic. Like, he had thoughts. He called bullshit on people who were, like on Max Shrek and stuff like that. He had lots of money, but not like throwing it around at people. And yeah, I'm a big fan of his Bruce Wayne. And there is a difference, I'm sure we'll talk about it, the difference between a Bruce Wayne and a Batman, because they're, you know, and his Batman obviously was constrained a lot by technology. He couldn't move his neck. But also just, you know, it was the first time he was the first person to embody that role as it has become, you know, since then. Which is pretty remarkable in its own way, because that's a huge, I also love that people were handwriting letters to the studio as opposed to Twitter bombing people. Just a reminder of how far we've come. And but can you just imagine being that upset that you like pay for postage, you know, and you go out of your way to, how did you find the studio's address at that time? You know,
Yeah,
like
the internet
them.
did was make it much easier to get.
Yeah, you had to earn it. You had to earn it then.
I mean,
like
they were committed. They were committed to hating Michael Keaton as that choice. But again, like you said, I was a kid. He was my first introduction to Bruce Wayne Batman in that role, and so, you know, I had no issues with it. I mean, obviously I'd been watching the 60s Batman for, you know, years and years and years, but like, there wasn't a part of me that was like, that's not right. He's not wholesome at all.
Yeah, I'm with you that he played him in an aloofness that no one else has quite captured. I know that Bale had to turn the switch a few times and play him like he was a complete putz, you know, to the public, but Michael Keaton does it, especially in part one, in such an aloof manner that's rather hilarious. And you think it's all an act, but like you said, then he acts that way with Alfred too. So there is a bit of just distance, I guess, with him, even as Bruce Wayne. But I think because he was so many people's first, that goodwill is carried on for quite a while. But in hindsight, I think looking at it now, like you said about his mask, the fights are terrible. He can barely move. He doesn't look all that convincing, I think, when you see modern Batman, modern fighting. But yeah, I do like his Bruce Wayne compared to several others that came after him.
Yeah, I feel the same, you know, more or less. I think something interesting and important to remember is that Batman 89 was not an origin story. You know, it was kind of an adjacent one, you know, eventually kind of becomes, we see his origin and, you know, the death of his parents, you get it, but it's not like an origin in the way that we know origins in comic book movies now. So with that, there's kind of a lot of heavy lifting to be done, and I think that he does it as Bruce in a really subtle, really intelligent way, because he is a comedic actor with good chops, and because Michael Keaton is just a talented actor in general. I think this is when people really started to recognize it, probably, if I'm not mistaken. But like, you know, he just did such a good job, and with so really conveying a lot with a little, because, you know, Burton, the script wasn't an overly complex script, you know, like it's pretty straightforward as it should be. So is Batman Returns, a little more psychologically deep and certainly more psychologically weird. But like, you know, he does a real lot with gestures and with just his presence, and his presence, you know, his presence as Bruce Wayne. Yeah, I would probably say is the best. I like Bale too. I'm sorry, in Reeves, Patterson's hard to say because there barely is any Bruce Wayne in it, but despite it being 3 hours. But like, you know, it's hard to even judge those Batman, because like that suit did no favors, you know, like this is a guy, I mean, he was just, you might as well molded him in like and he was molded in plastic, you know, so it's just like he just shot a few things, you know, like grappling hooks and hope for the best, I think, you know, and that was about it, but he still looked cool, you know.
Well, Nicholson gave Keaton some really good advice about the suit, you know, and acting. He's like, because Keaton was having, you know, struggling, and, you know, similar to a lot of, you know, movies that had actors who had to be in a bulky costume. You know, RoboCop is another example where they had a lot of problems, and Peter Weller was very unhappy, and until there was a sort of light bulb moment that went off. That's where he was like, he was trying to do this elegant flowing thing, and he realized that the bulkiness was the character. He's like, that's the posing where you see RoboCop, just not to talk too much about RoboCop, but the RoboCop is a very posy guy, you know what I mean? It's almost like comic book frames with him, and that's where the way he played him, and the way he played him successfully. And Nicholson told Keaton, he says, let the costume do the acting. Just let the costume do it. So Keaton, you know, says, so he can't turn his head. Okay, so he'll do these poses where he's like, it looks you know, when you're a kid, it looks great. I mean, today it obviously looks kind of silly, but he made it work. He made it work for what it was. And I thought that was great. I do want to talk about one last thing with Keaton before we move on, but the great thing about Keaton is that he would dance between so many different emotions in one scene, which is why he's my favorite Bruce Wayne. Like, take the scene where they're in the armory at his mansion, and he's got all these costumes from different, you know, parts of the world, and the reporter guy and Basinger's character, they're in there talking about it, and Wayne comes in and he's playing dumb. And I love how he's sort of walking behind them, but he's not saying anything. They don't know that he's there. So that's kind of a play on, he's Batman. So that's what kind of Batman does. He spies on people, but he's in the shadows. So he's like walking behind them as they're talking about Bruce Wayne, and Bruce Wayne standing right behind them. Brilliant filmmaking, brilliant storytelling. And he says, you know, it's Japanese, because they're talking about, well, what's this one? Oh, he says, Bruce Wayne says it's Japanese. He says, how do you know? He says, because I bought it in Japan. And he's arrogant for a second. And then he goes back to being aloof. And then he goes back to being comedic. And then he goes back to being dark. And then he's playing all these different emotions. And that's why I thought Keaton, to this day, I just think he's just better. He's just better at it. I think by the time we roll around to the other Bruce Waynes and the other Batmen, too much pressure is being placed on them. I think Keaton was kind of like, okay, I'll do this character, but it's just, you know what I mean? He and it was Burton. I mean, they had a relationship, you know, they had done Beetlejuice together, and they were friends. And I think they had their own interpretation of it. And I think it worked because Keaton was relying a lot on Burton as a director to make sure that he wasn't looking like stupid or anything. And Keaton brought some really interesting things to the table. So, but yeah, let's talk about Jack Nicholson, because you can't talk about Keaton in that movie without talking about Jack Nicholson, and you can't talk about the Joker without talking about Nicholson. But Nicholson was great. I thought, okay, so I think Nicholson is very good as the Joker. I think he's obviously playing himself. But he's very good at playing himself. I think Nicholson's laugh is the best Joker laugh, in my opinion. I think his laugh is great. I don't think he's the best Joker, but I think he brought a kind of sadistic, but also very playful, which is, you know, pretty standard for the Joker. But I thought he did a really good job. He made off like gangbusters. I think he made like $50 million from that movie because he had profit points. He that was like one of his stipulations. Is like, okay, I want a piece of the toys, because he knew how big that juggernaut was going to be. He had the foresight to understand that. So he made a ton of money off of that movie. And to this day, he's a huge Burton fan. Like, he loved Burton, and, you know, he loved the character, and you could tell he was having a lot of fun with it. What do you guys think of Nicholson as the Joker?
I mean, you said most of my thoughts there. Like, he certainly in hindsight was playing himself more than you realize maybe as a kid, but certainly brought an iconic thing to it. He got top billing. Not only did he get all the points in the back end, the movie, the poster says Nicholson Keaton. So he was a major player and was able to leverage that. But I never thought about him having the best laugh. He might, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, he's super fun in it. It's kind of weird. Like, I think, at least for me, take for granted, like, these are people's real first cracks. I mean, again, besides Batman 66, which I love, which is its own thing, but these are people like first cracks at playing, you know, Bruce Wayne on screen, or you know, Joker, who, you know, like, even in the comic to that point in the 80s was still a very over the top figure. And how do you do that? It's so interesting, you know, now I think about it, it's like, you know, you look at, you know, how, you know, these movies are now, you know, comic book movies are now, and they're younger actors and actresses, you know, they're the younger performers, you know, whether it be Zoe Kravitz, you know, Pattinson, and Paul Dano, which Paul Dano might be the oldest, I guess, out of the three, but they're younger, you know, and I feel like that's something that's so weird. Like, Nicholson was like, I don't know, at this point, late 40s, 50s, probably, I would assume. I mean, he'd been around for like 30 years, you know, in 20 plus years, 25 years or so in cinema, like an iconic legend, even at that point. And like, here he is playing the Joker. I mean, it's such a weird thing to think about now. It's like, you know, it's like if like, you got like, I don't even know who the comparable would be to like, you know, be in a next Marvel movie. I guess there is no comparable because every performer's been in the MCU at this point. But you know, it's so interesting that he was that role, and it's so interesting how he embraced it, because he plays Nicholson, you know, he does what Nicholson does, but like he also is having a lot of fun with it. You know, you could see someone of his stature walk into that role and either kind of sleepwalk through it, or just ham it up and be poor for the movie and not really a fit. But like, he's really adhering to Burton's vision and what's going on in that movie. Like, he fits the texture of that movie perfectly well. He doesn't go too Nicholson, you know, he doesn't get too bored with it. Like, he really, really does a great job. And it could have gone, bringing someone like that. Like, again, Keaton, like we said, was someone who, you know, everybody knew Keaton was, and he'd done a lot of great films. Like, you know, Shawn said Beetlejuice, he had Mr. Mom, he'd done a lot of great stuff, but he wasn't that Nicholson level. So you had someone you're taking a risk on, you know, in this role with Keaton. Then you have someone like Nicholson who that can go sideways really quick. And it worked. They worked well together. They worked well on their own. And it's a testament to really how, you know, how frozen in time that is. And because it worked, that is what got more serious actor. You get DeVito, you get Michelle Pfeiffer, for God's sakes, playing the Catwoman in the next role. And they kind of gave legitimacy to the idea that these could be important roles, and, you know, really profitable roles as well. You make a ton of money.
I feel like Nicholson's Joker is the closest to Cesar Romero's Joker, like from the 60s, actually, in like terms of, in comparison to, you know, what it's become now, for sure. Like, it has a lot more levity to it than what the Joker has become. Like, he's a good transition point to what the Joker is now, which is almost completely sadistic and sociopathic and crazed. Whereas, you know, he still had the flower that shot, you know, that shot poison, which is very, you know, Joker from the comic books, which I've never read, but I just know that because I read a lot. You know, I've read a lot about what they were like. And the kind of like the makeup and stuff was actually, I thought, really, really similar in a lot of ways. And it was almost like, I felt like he took a lot of Cesar Romero and then just darkened it up a bit and just added himself to it, like, which I already mentioned. And I looked, and sure enough, Jack Nicholson was born in 1937. So he was filming this movie in his 50s for sure, which is also crazy to think about, because especially Joker as a character, you think of him having this long-standing career with Batman. And, you know, I mean, this is like particularly an issue that I had with a lot of the old movies, is that they had one villain per movie, which is always unsatisfying to me. And so I'm, you know, like, they always kill them off, or they're always gone, which we'll get into in the later films. But like, I appreciate, like, I wish he had been like younger, lankier, and maybe just a bit weirder, but I was happy with it. Like, for me, it was a good transition from the 60s Batman that I was used to into, you know, to where when I saw Ledger's, you know, Joker, obviously I was like, oh, this is completely different than I'm used to, in a way that was fun and exciting. But yeah, Nicholson being Nicholson. But yeah. I appreciated that they kept a lot of like Joker-isms about his costume and things like that definitely got left behind later on in the Nolan films, where they were going for more realism. But, you know, purple suit, you got the flower, you know.
Yeah, before we move on to Schumacher, I just really quickly want to talk about the score, because the Danny Elfman score is, I mean, that was soundtrack to my childhood, you know, at certain points, and it's a great score. And again, you wouldn't think that would be the right choice, because Elfman had done most of all Burton's movies at that point. I think, you know, Beetlejuice and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and great scores. But you know, it's just iconic. I mean, what can you say, really? I mean, it's an iconic score. It's great. It's got, you know, it's got the gothic darkness to it. It's hummable. Which a lot of scores aren't anymore for some reason. They're not hummable, which is its own conversation. But what do y'all think of the score?
I'm with you. I had the soundtrack and the score to this one. This is the first movie I think I did both of those things, and yeah, it really got me into film scores. And I think he trusted Elfman to do something different for him, because yeah, he had a particular sound that he did for both Pee-wee and Beetlejuice, that a lot of people just identify as that Elfman sound, but he can go different, he can go bigger. If you don't believe me, check out his Black Beauty score or Summersby score. They sound nothing like Elfman. You wouldn't even recognize him. But yeah, Batman, I would say it's in the conversation with John Williams. Superman is just being so iconic, and it was tied to him for decades, to where even Elfman in the Justice League theatrical cut reprised it for Batman, so you can hear it in the theatrical version of Justice League.
Yeah, I love the soundtrack, or not the soundtrack. Oh, I mean, I love the soundtrack too as a kid, but love the score. I mean, that's quintessential Elfman for me. Like, I base everything else on Elfman around his Batman scoring.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's there's nothing much more to say. I mean, it's just, I don't know, it kind of shows the point we're making in like stressing iconography, and this gets into the realism versus getting away from realism, whatever conversation that exists in Batman. But like, when you see artists allowed to make things iconic, the way Nicholson made it iconic, the way Elfman made it iconic, Burton made it iconic, and you're taking an iconic thing, it's like you can really do some great stuff. I think the more you kind of ground it, the more like the Batmobile looks like a tank, it's like, nah, you're kind of losing something of that. It still like kind of looks cool, and you're like, but it's functional. It's like, it's real. It's like, well, the most realist thing about Batman is that if there was a Batman, he'd be like dead in a week, like, so I mean, like, it's not real. So like, once you start getting at stuff, it's like, then you're moving the iconography and the stuff that really makes it special. And this score is another thing, like Shawn said, or somebody said, like, it's like he wasn't the obvious choice, but once you hear it, you're like, oh, this is perfect, and he nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Schumacher is an interesting.
Talk about, you mentioned how different Burton's movies were. I feel like absolutely the same can be made for Forever versus Batman and Robin. They are very different. Like,
oh yeah,
Robin was him getting to do full on Schumacher. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah. Batman and Robin is his Batman Returns, where he
exactly
went fully off the rails.
Yeah, no, totally. But Schumacher was an interesting choice. I mean, Burton was supposed to do the third movie, but parents were complaining about Batman Returns. Like, McDonald's canceled their Happy Meal tie-ins specifically because parents were complaining about Returns. And Returns made a little bit less money than the first one, so they basically fired Burton and said, "Hey, let's get Schumacher." Or Schumacher was approved by Burton as a choice, and Schumacher was great. I mean, he Lost Boys and bunch of 80s movies that are fantastic, and I thought on the surface, he was the interesting choice, but the results were okay. Let me just tell you this: when I was a kid, Batman Forever came out, and I was a teenager, still in love with Batman. I went to that movie not really knowing what I was in for. I saw the trailer; it seemed a little bit different from the Burton movies, but I was still excited about it. Still a huge Batman fan. I remember going opening day, waiting in line, back when waiting in line was a thing. It's not really a thing anymore, but I specifically remember I went to Pacific Theaters in Oakland. There was I can't remember the name of the specific theater that it was, but it was Pacific Theaters. It was the theater looked like half of a golf ball. It kind of looked like the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood. And I was waiting in line, and they let us in. And I remember me and another guy or another couple guys went to the wrong theater, and we were all panicked because we thought if we were going to miss 1 second of this movie, kill us, because like it was just, we couldn't. So they were screaming and I was screaming. We were running to like, where's the 12/4 or whatever showing of Batman, and it was So it was, I don't know, it was interesting, and I went to see it, and I liked it. I my teenage self thought it was a great movie. My adult self feels a little bit different, but I watched it and I thought it was good. On the surface and taken on its own, I think it accomplishes what it set out to do, which is one of my requirements for saying whether something is good or successful or not. But what are y'all's memories of the first Schumacher movie?
Well, I'll start just because I was a huge, ridiculously huge Jim Carrey fan on top of being a ridiculously huge Batman fan. So I was just unnerved with excitement to see this film. And I think we all know the behind the scenes stories now of like Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey's interactions and everything, but I think Jim Carrey's great. I think he's brilliant as the Joker. I loved it. It was fun.
Riddler.
Oh yeah, the Riddler, excuse me. I'm saying all this in my head and I'm just like watching him pose. So I got distracted. Jim Carrey in a tight green suit, I guess. Just Edward Nygma was a silly name, but I liked it. I liked his little bit of an origin story. See, here I am already talking about the villains, which I guess is another thing. I mean, this was our first nipples Batman, which was almost like Schumacher's like, okay, Burton got all the iconography, but I've got nipples. Like, I'm going to add to everything you thought you knew about Batman. Now there's nipples. But again, like even going back to it as an adult, it's like, it's still okay to me. It's not a great film, but it passes, like it was a popcorn fun film for me. I thought it was, yeah, I guess fun is the word I keep coming back to. Like I enjoyed it. And so it holds a lot of like nostalgia place for me, I guess, because of the two things I mentioned. It was a Batman film and it had Jim Carrey in it. And I still love his performance as Riddler, and obviously it's been recently been compared a lot to, because it's our first time to get another Riddler since then. Yeah, I thought it was fine. I could care less about Val Kilmer as Batman or Bruce Wayne. I had zero feelings towards him whatsoever. Like I just felt like he filled a role. And I think that was literally what happened. Again, from behind the scenes stories, I've heard it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to show up and do this thing for a paycheck and a favor, like I said I would, and then I'm out, and that's kind of how it felt on screen, honestly. And it just felt very much like a summer blockbuster, but it gave us Kiss from a Rose, which I mean, hello. And it was like, talk about a return to marketing. I remember that Kiss from a Rose video coming out and I would watch it so I could see scenes for Batman in it, before the movie came out, and tying it with a really popular song and like coming back to its roots of like consumerism in that way, where, Burton had gone off the rails in the most delightful way, like producing a more marketable product. And Schumacher had a good, this is not the movie that, like, it's not great, it's not Burton, but it's like the issues I start having are with Batman and Robin, where it's just like really went off the rails, which is enjoyable and fun in its own way, but was just devastating as a young Batman fan who was like, yeah, had taken like, my parents, I'd gotten them to buy tickets for all of my friends so we could go together as a group, and there was going to be Batgirl, and I was just like very, very let down. Where again, if we're going back with like, if that was Schumacher getting to take the wheels off, but it was probably actually in reality something more of like the studios were like, hey, people like lighter Batman, so we can sell more stuff that way. Let's make it even lighter. Let's have Batman on ice. And and I don't know that for a fact, but that was like, it was a real letdown for me, where Forever was fine. It was totally passable. It wasn't the best. It wasn't the worst. I was like, I still had hope in Batman as a franchise.
So 95, a lot of malls were opening across the country that were anchored by a Warner Brothers store. And I remember that trailer playing on their little jumbo screen in the back of the counter at the time. And the trailer for Batman Forever did play like gangbusters. It looked really promising. Like, it's not Burton, it's a little different, but it looked promising because it didn't show some of the wackiness in the trailer. It was just a well put together trailer at the time. And I walked out of it feeling like I think a lot of people felt like walking out of the prequels who were older than me. And yeah, when you watch these two together now, you see that he was already leaning the direction of Batman and Robin in Batman Forever. He was priming himself to go that direction. And I took that movie personally. It was like an affront to me at the time. I couldn't stand it. I thought Two-Face was one of the worst interpretations of Two-Face. I've talked to Michael about this. I'm a big fan of like both Nightwing and Tim Drake and stuff. And I like Two-Face to not just be a Joker knockoff, especially after you saw like the promise of like what could have been Billy D. Williams in part 3.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Schumacher just said, just do Joker. And it was just such an awful thing that I couldn't stand it. And then, you know, like Britney, I grew up with Frank Gorshin, Riddler, and Jim Carrey, who was hot as anything coming off of 94. He blew up with like 3 enormous movies. So he was one of the top people in the country to be that character. He seemed like he was just doing a Frank Gorshin impression. So yeah, the less said about both of these movies, in my opinion, the better. I've softened over time, like I have with prequels and other things, but like this was my first experience of like, what the F was that? I walked out of the movie just mad. I couldn't stand how they like wedged Robin in and he was Robin so quick. Even back then, I'm like, why didn't they tease Robin for the next movie? Like my brain was thinking like, why are you putting 3 movies in one movie? But yeah, I to this day, I'm not too fond of either one of them. I don't dislike Schumacher as a whole. Like I certainly like Lost Boys and a few of his movies, but I just at the time was offended, I think, in both of those movies. And watching Batman Robin in the theater, I was just angry. I was like, I'm not walking out of this just out of like being a Batman fan, but I truly am hating this film.
I can agree to that. I couldn't even drive, I don't think, at the time. Either way, my parents had shuttled a bunch of teenagers to go watch it. And I was like, this is really embarrassing. You know, I was embarrassed that I had invited all of my friends to see a Batman movie with me.
Yeah. So at the time I saw Batman Forever, I loved it. I imagine it was just, I was 14, you know, it had Robin, he like drove around the Batmobile, listened to Offspring, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm 14, I get it, you know. Like, now I think this movie, and I'm sorry, you know, to say it, is awful somehow, but yet it's not the worst because Schumacher still had one more in it. Now, and let me preface with a few things. One, I think Schumacher's a really talented director. Lost Boys, Tigerland, Phone Booth, these are great movies. He's made really, really good movies. Like, but these are not of them. Batman Forever, like, let me say this too. I get it. I get why this movie exists because of Batman Returns. You look at the ending of Batman Returns, to say it's esoteric and weird is being very generous. Like, that ending was just like, it's Batman. You want kind of like an action climax. You want some sort of like something that's like a fight scene or a set piece or something like that. And it's just like Batman tearing off his mask and Shrek is tied. It's just like, what is this conclusion? You know, like, and I love it. I personally love it. I'm like, yeah, I love it. Like, I'm like, yes, give me that dark psychological weird shit of like Batman and Catwoman. Like, I'm there. But I get how that doesn't play everywhere. So what you get in Batman Forever is this beginning of these 2 movies that, like, you can see Schumacher trying to marry the kind of exuberant color with the gothicness, the exuberant color of Batman 66 with the gothicness of Burton's, and failing in both. Like, there's shots in this movie, I mean, just the way it's shot, let's talk about that, so ridiculously bad. Like, the it's dark, you can't see anything, the colors are neon but garish. Like, the ending of like the way it looks when they're in Riddler's kind of cage or whatever that is, and you know, he's got Nicole Kidman and Chris O'Donnell, you know, both, you know, you can only save one, which is a Batman 66 conundrum if there ever was one. But like the way it looks, these horrible neon, and it's dark, and it's like you can't see anything. And I mean, there are some nice shots. It's funny, I was arguing about this movie with a friend of mine who was like, look at these cool shots. I'm like, yes, but for every cool shot that's in Batman Forever, there's like a dozen garish, incomprehensible ones. You know, it's so, you know, Shawn was saying the performances from both Carey and Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face and Riddler are so over the top and so relentless. They have one mode and it's over the top. You know, and then you have Val Kilmer balancing out where that guy looked like he'd rather be in prison. Like, he was just like anywhere but here, you know, like, and I like Val Kilmer. I think, again, another talented, really somebody I admire. But like the whole thing that you get is just ultimately this like ultra hyper colorful gothic puke of a movie that like doesn't work at all. The performances don't work, the directing doesn't work, the cinematography doesn't work, the story is like they're trying to insert that action climax that like there's gonna be a fight scene and it's gonna be a showdown. He's gotta make a decision. He's gotta, all the villains are gonna be there. Like all this kind of stuff is so ridiculously bad. And the fact that like, and we'll talk about this, the fact that then he doubled down on this is amazing. So I did not like Batman Forever. I like Batman and Robin even less. But I just, like I said, I used to like it when I was 14. I loved it, and maybe that's the point. But now as I've revisited, and I just did like 2 weeks ago, I was like, this is unwatchable.
I don't know why Britney wouldn't love Batman and Robin. It's Batman 66 with $100 million.
Yeah, I just didn't though, like, but I think
because you can't do
I had
camp
already
on
been
purpose.
shown the way. I had already been shown Batman Returns. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, I love this.
Yeah, no, I'm half kidding. It's like Snakes on a Plane. It's like if camp has failed sincerity, you can't go set out to make a bad movie that will be worse than a movie that was trying to not be bad that is bad. You know what I mean? I think Batman and Robin can't match up to 66 because there is a homage factor to it, and like it just doesn't work the same.
It's funny. That's like one of the best lessons I ever learned. So I actually, full disclosure, I wrote a Batman 66 comic series, Batman 66 meets Archie, because why not? And I co-wrote with Jeff Parker, who had written Batman 66 for a very long time. And one of the best things he ever said to me is that like the thing that works about that Batman is that it is camp, and we've defined it as camp now. But they weren't trying to be camp. Like it was earnest. Like Adams West Batman is very earnest in what it's doing. And that's the thing that Batman Robin is not. It's not earnest. It's trying to be camp. And when you try to be camp, that's when you miserably fail.
Yeah, just like The Room. You can't, when you set out to make a bad film, it's just annoying. And then when you make The Room, you're like, oh my God. And then it's just sad in a different way. But you can feel the earnestness and the narcissism in it, which somehow brings it some more like realism versus like, oh, remember how funny that was? Let's make our own version of that, which I feel like we went through a period of that in films a while back where it's like, oh, it's fun to make exploitation films, that are Hobo with a Shotgun and stuff like that, because like those films were made in earnest to a certain extent, and now you're just copying exploitation films. Yeah.
Right. The only bright side I might give Batman and Robin, thinking about it now, is that, and I'm sure we'll get to this shortly, is that we're getting, I don't mind the realism and the dark and the grit, but it's eliminating a lot of the fantastical villains, and at least Batman and Robin threw out 2 somewhat fantastical villains. Like I can't imagine Poison Ivy in a Nolan verse or a Matt Reeves verse yet, although she could maybe exist in the latter. But Nolan stuff got so true to life that like you could never have like a Clayface in his world, or you can never have that version of Poison Ivy or Bane or Mr. Freeze,
or no color, like.
Well, I will say this about Schumacher, and I feel like it's a trend that happens with certain franchises. I mean, if you think of Bond, James Bond, I've always thought of Batman as a sort of a superhero version of, I know Brittany doesn't like that term, but superhero version of James Bond, where he's got the gadgets, he's got the Playboy lifestyle, he's got the isolation. And I thought what Schumacher was trying to do with his movies was acknowledge just how silly on the surface this character is, because it is a guy in a bat suit running around, swinging from buildings, punching crazy, ridiculous villains. And I don't think Schumacher understood the character. I think he was hired as a guy like Burton, it was a hired gig, and he did the best that he could. But he was trying, at least with Forever especially, he was trying to get to the core of what the movie is, or what the character is kind of a silly character. If you look at it as an objective observer and don't take it, sort of firsthand, it's like, yeah, okay, it's a guy in a freaking bat suit and he's a billionaire, and why would he be doing this? And it just doesn't make any sense. But I think he went too far with it. Just like in the Bond movies or some of the earlier Bond films, they just got completely ridiculous. Moonraker being one, and then they course correct. And I think with Nolan, we'll talk about this. I mean, I think with Schumacher, it went way too far in one direction. And I think with Nolan, it went, I won't say way too far, but it went pretty far in the other direction.
I will.
And I think that's it. And I'm sure you will. And I think that, you know, there's a happy middle ground that I would like to see. And I don't think we've reached that middle ground yet, but we can get into it. But yeah, you know, that's a good way to transition into the Nolan verse. And I will admit that I was not enthused with Batman Begins. I went to see it with a buddy of mine. I was just burned out on superheroes at that point. I mean, I remember I loved Blade. I wasn't a huge Spider-Man fan. I did like the first movie. I really liked the second one, but I was always a casual observer. I would see, you know, Spider-Man fanatics. I just didn't get it. I was much more of a sort of a dark, especially when I was younger, you know, I was in that dark phase. But when Nolan's film came around, I was in my 20s, and I was an indie guy. I was, you know, I wasn't into superheroes anymore. So I was like, okay, Batman, whatever. It's just okay. It's not going to be the Burton garbage, but you know, I went to see it, and I just wasn't impressed. I mean, I was impressed in the way that he made it. I loved his films. I love Memento, but there was just something about it that was just off. And I didn't realize what exactly was off until I went to see The Dark Knight. But we can get into that. But I do want to talk about y'all's experience with the first seeing Batman Begins and all that. But when I went to see it, the crowd was cheering, and I was just kind of sitting there, and I just didn't get it. I mean, I was like, I don't know. I'm not connecting with this movie. I thought Bale did a really good job. I thought he was playing the character a little too depressed. I thought he, you know, the realism angle, I think, was something that rubbed off on him the wrong way, in a certain way. You know, I'm not going to articulate my thoughts very well on this, because Batman Begins for me is just a movie I've not really gone back too much. I've seen it a couple of times. I've never been able to jive with it. I like The Dark Knight much better, but Begins was a weird animal for me. I don't know, what did y'all experience with that movie?
I might be in the minority here, but I recognize Dark Knight as a modern classic with an iconic performance by Ledger, but on the whole, I've always preferred Begins, and I think partly because it's closer to what I think I want from a Batman movie. I think it's more watchable. There's, as good as Dark Knight is, it's a structural mess, and it ends, and then there's a 30-minute Two-Face movie that starts. So there's some issues, and you can even argue, like, there's a few Batman movies that have that same issue, but the kind of, I like the Carmine Falcone. The second half of Batman Begins is where it's kind of started the promise of what I think Matt Reeves' movie has picked up, and we'll get into his movie too. But like, one of the things with Nolan was, you know, part one so clearly influenced by Blade Runner and by Asian cyberpunk stuff, and The Narrows kind of shows that it's all dark, it's all a particular aesthetic. Part two is nakedly Chicago, the whole movie. Part three is almost all Pittsburgh. So like, Gotham never felt like the same city in his three films, and that's always irked me. Mm-hmm. You can see like part two, he's like, oh, I'm really into Heat, so I'm gonna make Heat with Batman. And then it's like he Tarantino the trilogy. It's like whatever his was that month, he's like, I'm gonna make this now. So the three Batman movies to me feel like completely, and Begins especially feels like a different film from the second two, which have a little more in line and aesthetic similarities. But I like Begins a lot, and I think it was because it was the refresher from, you know, a failed. What's wild is Warner Brothers put that out the very same year as Halle Berry's Catwoman, because sticking to their complete mantra from then till present, they have no plan ever. So they don't know what they're doing. They're by the skin of their teeth making movies. But yeah, it was funny. They were trying to undo, you know, the Schumacher bad taste people had, but in the very same year they're making a Halle Berry Catwoman movie. So it's just funny how disparate those two films were in the same year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I like Batman Begins a lot. You know, there's a lot that I like about it, and I feel like it's kind of a victim of retrospection, because I remember when I first saw it, I was like, well, dang. I was like, this is what Batman would feel like in the real world, you know, and he's the only kind of like real world. He doesn't need to be bitten by a radioactive spider or et cetera, you know, or hit by a gamma blast or something ridiculous. Like it's plausible to a certain degree, right? Now, all we get is how superheroes would feel in the real world, and it's utterly fatigued, and it's just like, okay, you know, please stop. I'm begging you, you know. But now, when that first happened, oh, my phone was ringing there. Let me turn this off. Ugh. Stop. Go away.
You're in
Sorry
demand.
about this, guys. There. Anyway, so when this first happened, like it's such a breath of fresh air, and it was so different, and it was so cool, and like it was so well made. Christopher Nolan is a really, really skilled filmmaker. Like he's great, you know. He's you know, like him or not, you know, there's not all of his films I don't enjoy, but like he's a very skillful filmmaker, and this was like a well done, well made. Christian Bale was awesome, Michael Caine was awesome. You have all these like great performances. We had Scarecrow, which is like, I mean, to lead off a franchise, to start with Scarecrow was nuts, but awesome. So there was just, you know, and then you get the whole Ra's al Ghul. You have like a lot of like weird, risky, cool things, and like I don't know that I would go back to it all the time. I'm glad it exists. It's kind of unfortunate that gave us, you know, like the whole superheroes in the real world that kind of started it in a way, like hyper realistic, hyper well done, etc., not taking any aesthetic chances the way, you know, Burton did, or even Schumacher technically did. I guess they failed, but he did take them. But like, you know, it really kind of like set a template that unfortunately has been abused over time. But looking at that movie in a vacuum, it's a strong, well-made movie that I enjoy a lot. I think the second one's better, and we'll get to that, but like just on its own, Batman Begins is good.
I agree with the Batman Begins is good. When it came out, I agree. I felt like it was a breath of fresh air. Now it's not, like going back to it, now I've seen it, like that trope be played out, but it was the first time that kind of like hyper realism, and I appreciated that. That movie's actually really bright. There's a lot of shit that happens in the sunlight in that movie, you know? And so like for what I liked most about it was I felt like it was setting up something that I was really excited for the first time. And which, you know, some people, you know, especially going back to it now, they're like, oh, it's such a slog, you know, and, you know, all this training and stuff like that. But I've never been like anti like slow movies, if you will. I have so many people are like, oh, it was paced so slow. I very rarely have that problem with movies. I normally like a good slow pace. And in trilogy, I was totally okay with a lot of it being backstory, because it felt like it was giving me a real ground, you know, ground for the character. Again, you know, it suffered from the things of like, you know, I think they misused Ra's al Ghul, and I loved Scarecrow, but there wasn't enough of him. And I love Scarecrow because I like creepy shit. You know, I wanted some weirdo in a sack, you know, like poisoning people. You know, just get me back to the darkness in a lot of ways. And I thought Bale was great. There's a moment, yeah. I thought his Bruce Wayne was great. He's I think probably. Yeah, I think, again, we can talk about Pattinson later, but yeah, I liked his Bruce Wayne for the most part. I didn't like that he was just like mega rich and just co-opted military, you know, like technology or whatever. I thought that was kind of cheesy and silly. But I thought like through and through the performances were good. I thought it was a solid movie. I was very like happy with it when I saw it. Yeah, and because for me, again, now it's like I'm over it, but at the time I was really excited to see something grounded in what felt like reality. Like, yeah, this guy got mad, but he just happens to have a lot of money, and so he's using that to do other things. I don't think he did as good of a job with that stuff later on, but I guess we'll move into The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I mean, I think Batman Begins is a good movie. I personally don't like it. And this is something that I see in online cultures or circles is it's this whole like, if I like something, therefore it is good, which is just not the case. You know what I mean? I do acknowledge that movies sort of exist in this subjective reality where you can have an opinion about it, but it is what it is. Batman Begins is a good movie. It's well written. It's well directed. It's well acted. My personal issues with that film is it went too far in the other direction of what I sensed that Schumacher was getting at. And I didn't realize this until later. I was like, well, Schumacher thinks this is completely silly, but he's trying to make it in a way that is honoring the silliness as opposed to Nolan, which it almost felt like he was embarrassed by the character. And I know that's probably not the case. That's just my way of getting into the conversation about it, because it's like when I first saw Begins and I saw The Dark Knight, which I do like better, but I was always hit by this nagging uncomfortableness where they were trying to make it like logical, where it's like, okay, well, who built the Batcave? Who built the okay, let's say you take Burton's Batman and that tunnel that he goes through to get to the Batman. It's like, well, who built all that? I don't give a shit. I didn't give a shit when I was a kid, and I still don't care. And that the point is, it's like,
yeah, and famously Grant Morrison.
I was about to say the same quote as Grant Morrison.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you probably know it better. I'll butcher it.
I might.
Go ahead.
Basically, it was like Grant. He was asked at a con, like, something. And correct me if I'm wrong, Shawn. I was like, who puts air? Who fixes the flat tires of the Batmobile? And he said, nobody. They're not real.
That's what an adult would ask, but a kid would go, who cares? It's fiction. Like, kids know better than adults, because adults want to find out the mechanics of all that stuff, and the kids will be like, it doesn't matter. We're watching a guy dressed like a bat fight villains. Farrell, I'd almost argue that not as extreme as Schumacher or Burton, but I think Batman Begins is more heightened than the follow-ups. He's got a creepy villain who tries to poison the water supply. And then part 2 and 3, it's just like crime-based villains, Occupy Wall Street nods, stuff to the real world. Like, I think it's even less heightened. So maybe he did the opposite, where Burton and Schumacher went up and Nolan went, almost more grounded. And I'm not slighting those movies. I do like Dark Knight. I just, like I said, I think I prefer Begins just because it feels more year one. They finally did something right where Gordon is a character, which is another thing I like about the new one. Him and Gordon have a relationship in the Nolan movies, because he's nothing in the first 4. Like, Gordon's like barely there. And I do appreciate that Nolan's movies did kind of build that relationship. Gary Oldman was great as Gordon in those.
Yeah, it was.
Just to finish my point, I mean, and I didn't know that Grant Morrison quote, whatever that is.
Yeah.
That's just how I feel about it. And I still feel that way. Is like, it's like, okay, it's like Michael said, the dude will be dead in a week.
Right.
So when I was watching Nolan's movies, it felt like somebody who didn't accept the character, so had to logic his way around it. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I don't get this. Even if he does, I'm just saying, I'm expecting it's probably totally bullshit what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's how I felt when I was watching it. Okay, I don't get Batman. I don't like him, but if I had to make a movie about him, this is how I would explain how he's doing what he's doing. And it's like, well, that just completely falls apart, because once you start going down that path, I can argue my way through it and go, well, that doesn't make sense because of this and that. And The Dark Knight, I think, is a better movie than Begins. I think it's definitely messy, and a lot of it doesn't make sense, but as a cinematic experience, it was more successful to me. And when I watched it, I liked it more. I still thought it was just kind of, it's like, what the fuck is, like, this just does not make sense to me. Like, why are they trying to make this character so grounded? You know what I mean? And it's like, if I saw that movie as a teenager, I probably would have thought it was really cool. Like, oh, it's great. Just kind of like, I like Batman Forever. You know what I mean? I probably would have really loved, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And by the time you get to Rises, it's just completely gone off the rails. Batman, it's like Bane breaks his back, Batman does a few push-ups, and he's off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and to me, it's just as silly, but you're treating it like it's not. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that movie, those movies always felt kind of disingenuous to me. Not that I think Nolan is a just disingenuous guy. It just, that's the way it was coming off. So no disrespect, man, but I'm just saying.
Not disingenuous, but after Tenet, I am convinced he's just an emotionless robot who doesn't know how to act like a human being. But and I do love Inception and a couple of his other movies. But no, Farrell, to your point about that Grant Morrison quote, is that's the risk you run as soon as you try to go real. If you are going to start explaining how this works, and this works, our brains are going to go, well, how does that work? The other thing that you're not explaining. So if you're not going to be heightened, which I think by the time Rises hits, like I think Tom Hardy can be fantastic. I've seen him be amazing. I can't stand that interpretation of Bane on screen, only because it's nothing like Bane. It just is not. It's not Bane in any capacity. But I get it. Like, watching it without that baggage, it's fine. Like, I get what they were doing, but Rises felt like he was like looking at his own countdown clock of like, when can I get out of this franchise and move on?
Right.
Because yeah, the countdown clock that goes for 6 months and still ticks all the way down to 2 seconds is lazy writing, in my opinion. But, there's larger problems, but yeah, obviously Ledger and his untimely death and posthumous Oscar win definitely helped propel the middle movie. And the movie is a masterpiece because of, like you said, flaws or not, movies can still be masterpieces if they truly achieve what they were trying to achieve. And I think Dark Knight did. And it's a pretty grand crime epic that has, you know, guy dressed like a clown, guy dressed like a bat. I still very much enjoy lots of parts of it. And while Ledger's not the most Joker I think of in my head of a Joker, I still think his performance is like, it transcends. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think The Dark Knight is a blessing and a curse. A blessing in the sense that it brought the franchise to a place where you could do things like that, a crime epic and all that, but a curse where now I feel like it sets the template in a wrong way. And to me, now it signals to filmmakers who are making comic book movies that, oh, we can make, you know, highbrow. And again, on the surface, I don't mind this stuff. It just depends on how you do it. Like with Batman, I don't think it fits. You know, other superheroes that may fit. I really like Blade. I like how Blade is almost like a tone poem, you know, the way it's made, like the way it's shot and the way it feels. And I do think it all works because of, you know, Snipes and what Goyer brought to the table in terms of the writing and Ornington brought to the directing. But with Batman, it just feels different to me. But yeah, I don't want to harp on it too much, but it's just, I really want to, I'm glad we had this conversation because I was just dying to let my thoughts be known about this. I'm just like, I don't get this at all. You know what I mean? I appreciate the filmmaking, but you know, I just hope that this does not, I want the middle ground. I still haven't seen that.
Yeah, The Dark Knight was delightful. I saw it in the theater several times, and I think what was delightful about it was the cinematic portions of it, like all the stuff he shot in IMAX, you know, like we're talking like he actually flipped over, you know, an 18-wheeler, you know, in the middle of downtown Chicago. Like I am a sucker for Mad Max Fury Road, for like any sort of practical effects, and blow it up into IMAX even better. Like I'm all for like cinematic experience. But like I go back to it and like the only things I think about when I think of that movie, like in particular, you know, is I think about those moments, those very cinematic moments. And then I think of Heath Ledger's Joker and how every time I went to go to see that movie, it was just like downtime in between Heath Ledger coming on screen. Like he blew that movie out of the water. You know, there was just something so like I can handle the realism with his character because they didn't explain any of it. I liked that he had a different backstory every single time for his cuts or whatever. And that we had no idea who he was or where he came from. So like I appreciated that kind of like fun. I appreciated that he didn't die at the end because I was like, hell yeah, we're getting another one. I can't wait to explore this relationship further. And obviously we know that's not what happened, but what was the intention was to set it up to do that. Like, so in a lot of ways, I feel like Nolan was like, well, here's a third movie that I didn't want to make. Like he wanted to make a third movie with the Joker. You know, I don't know why Harvey Dent was in there. Nobody cares. Blow Maggie Gyllenhaal up. I don't care. You know, like all I think about when I think of that movie is the action set pieces, which are brilliant, and Heath Ledger. And like, that's enough. Like those are masterful and amazing. And that movie I think is great still to this day because of that. But in reality, like every other part of that movie is just a break before I get back to that kind of stuff. You know, I almost feel like it's just like, it's almost like a small intermission until you know, another brilliant scene comes up, which is okay, which is fine. I mean, and it's a huge movie and it became huge for a reason because it resonated with a lot of people. Wouldn't be surprised if those were the exact same reasons. Like no one's all like, oh, I really appreciate his relationship with whatever her name is. Rachel Dawes.
Yeah.
Rachel Dawes, yeah. Or, you know, like.
Not Katie Holmes.
Nobody cares. You know, like we care about blowing shit up and like seeing this, you know, weird like tense relationship between this creepy guy and this other creepy guy who's really acceptable. Anyway,
Yeah,
I love The Dark Knight.
I do too. What's interesting is that like I've had new thoughts on The Dark Knight in context of the Batman. Because I think it does a lot of the things that the Batman is trying to do, but does them a lot better. In the sense of this, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the Batman, but The Dark Knight is a very intense movie. It is intense from the very start. And the people who talk shit about Christopher Nolan, like being like online, not anybody here, but like, oh, he's a crappy filmmaker. It's like you all can study filmmaking for your entire lives and never make anything as good as the first 10 minutes of The Dark Knight. Because that thing is a masterclass of tension, story, everything. But the point is, from that start, even though the movie is long, even though it's a little bit bloated, even though it has a whole lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, like the experience of the movie, which is sometimes what you oftentimes go to in a movie. I'm not saying, hey, just turn off your brain and watch it. Sometimes the experience is just the cinema in front of you. And as the cinema in front of you and not like looking at certain things, the overall effect is an intense, smart movie from start to finish, at least for me. I'm not going to deny it. It has many, many warts and flaws and things that just are like, why is this even in this movie and what is even happening? But you take it all and I was riveted from start to finish. It's a great movie that has excellent performances. Now, Farrell, I'm with you. My main thing with the Batman is that we've never seen a proper marriage of realism and fantastical. We've never seen Batman having color, like a Michael Golden, where it's like it's dark, but it has color or whatever, like Kelly Jones mixed in like with I'm trying to think, Jim Aparo or something like that, like having these things meet. We haven't gotten that yet. And that's unfortunate because you can do it with Batman. I think that's what Batman is a blending of these two. Is Dark Knight that movie? Absolutely not. Dark Knight is relentlessly real and dark, and that's what it is. But I appreciate it for what it aims to be, this intense, riveting crime epic. And it does it really, really well. And it's unfortunate because then, 3 gave us something different and the wheels completely fall off. But like 1 was a good setup for what it is. And 2 really just nails this tight, riveting and just rocket of a movie. And granted, it benefited too. I mean, let's be honest, like this movie came out shortly after 9/11. We were in a different mind space. And like I think that helped because we were all just on edge, and this movie felt like a first like popcorn movie that was a response to 9/11 in some ways, like it just like the idea of terror and what Joker was. So like I think that kind of like heightened the theatrical experience, at least it did for me. I don't know if I saw in the movie theater now I would respond as like over the top as I did then. But even that withstanding, I still think I would say it's my favorite Batman movie. That's Batman Returns is shortly behind, but it's my favorite Batman movie, I think.
Well, before we move on to Snyder, I just want to make one point that reminded me about Michael, is the whole 9/11 thing, because I think that was obviously a watershed moment, but it's interesting how it affected cinema because movies after 9/11 became very dark, very serious. To me, I felt like to the detriment, because what you really want is the opposite. What you really want is something to remind us you want something that is not going to remind us about the tragedy. And I think that's a trap that a lot of superhero movies have fallen into, even some of the MCU stuff like Endgame and, Infinity War and things like that. I think Marvel has been a little bit more successful at blending the fantastical and the real in a way that DC hasn't been able to muster as much. But I think 9/11 is a wound that still Hollywood is notoriously just slow to change. And I think they're always like 10 years behind everything for some reason. I think the culture's moved on from the wounds that happened there. But I think Hollywood is still kind of latching on to some of that stuff and trying to graft some of those things onto their superhero franchises, because I think partly because they're also they're just embarrassed. You know what I mean? I think, when they go to their cocktail parties, they want to be able to talk about Batman in a sophisticated way with their sophisticated friends. And you can, but just the way they're trying to do it is they're trying to put a square peg into a round hole, I think. And I think that we need to get away from that. And I think Snyder was a guy who as much as I don't like those movies, was kind of successful at doing with Batman. Not totally, but I could see where he was going with it. And I loved his interpretation of Batman because I was sad that I didn't see more of it because what was it, Batman versus Superman, which really should not have been called that because it's Batman versus Superman for like 5 minutes.
Dawn of Justice.
Dawn of
Yeah,
Justice.
it literally should have been called Justice.
Oh boy.
Because that movie, whenever they cut away from Batman, I'm just like, what the? I want to see that movie. Like, I'm really interested in Ben Affleck's interpretation of the character. I thought Snyder kind of was close to nailing some of it. I mean, not all of it, but just he was getting there. And I saw, what was it, Justice League? I remember very little about that movie, and that's mostly because it just kind of I don't know, I just did not jive with it. I thought, okay, we're getting a little bit back to the realism, not the realism, but the fantastical. But I think now it's just not a good movie. It's not. They're trying to cram too many characters in here. They're trying to build on something when they should be building slowly, like Marvel did. But now they're trying to sort of get all that like immediately, and it didn't work. But yeah, the Snyder stuff was getting close. But I don't know what y'all's thoughts are on that.
If I can jump in first here.
Yeah.
The Man of Steel, in my opinion, is like 75% a great movie, and it got close too. And I think Snyder's the reason it didn't get close enough because Michael may or may not agree with me on this, but Frank Miller, speaking of blessings and curses on industries, Frank Miller defined Daredevil to me. Like, I love his Daredevil. I was such a fan of the Netflix show only because his Man Without Fear run was like part of my DNA. I just loved. He did dark well with Daredevil. He did dark well with Batman Year One. The problem is Dark Knight Returns has become such a text for people who love this darker kind of Batman. And the problem is I don't like Frank Miller's interpretation of Superman. When I was saying not all characters need to be dark, I hate his take on Superman. And I hate that Snyder's a super fan of Miller's Dark Knight Returns and also has that sort of take on Superman. And as it showed after Man of Steel, he never was that beacon of hope I was hoping to see him be. But yeah, Batman versus Superman, it went from DC was like, hey, you just made Iron Man, now make Civil War. They didn't build like Marvel did. Marvel put in the groundwork and they earned Civil War and they earned Endgame and all that stuff. DC was like, jump right from the Superman origin movie to him fighting Superman, introduce Wonder Woman, set up Justice League. So it was like they skipped a good Man of Steel sequel. They skipped a Batman solo movie that would have made sense, King Kong versus Godzilla style. Give me a Batman movie, then give me Batman versus Superman. But I agree that Snyder gets a few things right. It's cool to see Batman look like he can truly beat the shit out of people. And that's one thing that like Nolan's Batman was never convincing as the most, he's supposed to be the smartest guy in the room. He's supposed to be the great detective. He's supposed to be someone who has the means to beat the shit out of anybody if he needs to. And Nolan's Batman never came across that way to me ever. And again, I love parts of his movies and I like The Dark Knight a whole lot, but there's failings, I think, in that regard. But like Snyder gets the mythology and he gets the grand kind of, scope of some of it. And he did do some of that stuff really well, but I'm still kind of just bummed that we didn't get a proper either Batman solo movie that led up to it or, and we saw what happened with the theatrical cut of Justice League is a complete mess, in my opinion.
Yeah, oh man. Zack Snyder, I don't even know, man. Where do you even start with this guy?
We're gonna be nice so we don't get bombed by Twitter moms.
Oh, man, the justice, the Snyderverse, restore the Snyderverse. It's gonna be. I saw someone tweet last week. It's like the year is like 3099, and the wind rustles across an empty, barren landscape, and somehow still restore the Snyderverse is trending.
The sign's held up by a guy literally drowning. Like,
yeah. It's funny. For the longest time, up until, oh man, Justice League. I don't even know where the pivot moment came. I was like, before Zack Snyder became like Zack Snyder. And it was like 300 and Dawn of the Dead, which I still think Dawn of the Dead, if there's one of the movies you should never remake, that's one of them. That movie, his remake was awesome. It was awesome. Like it was a great movie. Like that 300, while it's silly, again, this, the Frank Miller fan in him looked great. It was different. And I was like, this guy maybe can't tell a story, but if he just gets somebody to write his movies and then he shoots them, he can really be something. But then he just went, and then he started just doing his own writing. And now he's like DPing himself. And I'm like, oh my God, like how is nobody stopping him? Because the talent is there. He's such a frustrating guy because he is talented and he's clearly passionate. But like the things that he makes are like, why did you make these decisions with these characters? It's one baffling turn after another. And you know, you're right, you know, excuse me, you're right, Shawn, like you feel the studio breathing down his neck to be like, what Marvel did in 10 years, we have to do in 2, you know? So like, yeah, he was definitely, you know, shoved in some corners to make these things work. And I don't know anybody who could have done that. But at the same time, the fundamental movies and the stories that he came up with, you know, he loves mythologizing, whatever the word is, you know, these superhero characters and making them gods. And he's not necessarily wrong, but he does them in such a way that's so both on the nose and nonsensical that like, it's just, you walk out of his movies just utterly tied in a pretzel, because what you saw was just a visual assault, a narrative assault that like makes no sense. And you're like, I don't understand what you are trying to do. I can see the kernels of your passion. I can see the nuggets of like, there's something in here that could be harnessed. But like the more it went, he just, like I said, he just kept getting more and more free reign, and all of those problems just magnified and exploded to the time you get like to the Justice League Snyder cut, which is like, I don't even know what to make of that thing. I can't believe I made it through it. I can't believe I survived the experience.
I did say to Farrell offline, I think if he just did a 3-hour cut alongside that HBO Max slog with the epilogue and all that, if he just did a proper cut of what he originally intended, that came out to about 245, I think it'd be a top tier DCEU movie. But
Probably.
as it stands, just Joss Whedon's version and this 4-hour version, neither one are like a top tier DC movie. But I do think, much like Peter Jackson's King Kong, there's a great movie in there. There's a great movie in that Justice League 4-hour thing. But yeah, the giving him reign to just make it 4 hours with that awful epilogue that I turned off, I think, right before it was over.
Yeah. Also give him an editor too. That would also.
I was going to say, a plug for good editing. Yeah, if there's a good movie in there, then you need a good editor to find that movie. I agree with what's like, I was always kind of excited, especially at the beginning with his visual style, but it just kind of like became a huge joke really quickly. Like, and his movies were just hard to take seriously because they were bad, you know, like even as much as like the visual style would be interesting, it would just, it just wouldn't work. It needs an editor. There needs like some oversight that's like, hey, this is how you tell a story well. He's telling stories, he's just not telling them very well. And like there was nothing, I felt like there was no meat to Batman and his universe, because like was said, there was no standalone film. We got to see the death of his parents again, which, you know, that's when it really became a joke, because it's like, really, we need to see it again. And then yeah, there was just like, there was just no, it didn't feel like there was a character there. It didn't feel like he brought anything new to the character that we hadn't already seen 3 separate times by different actors.
I think part of my issue was that his fealty to Frank Miller, and he adapted 300 almost too close, and he adapted Alan Moore's Watchmen almost too close. Those movies have merits, but like he adapted, and I get it, DC movies are more drab and more dark, and I don't mind that tone being different than Marvel, but you know, the fanboys of him think it's like an affront that Peacemaker makes a joke in a movie, or that anything that's attached to the Snyderverse, anything jokey is now like this big affront to their hero. And that's the fact that he adapted Dark Knight Returns, which is old Batman. We're meeting Batman at like age 40 something. He's been there for years. He's cynical. He's old. Dark Knight Returns is one of the most cynical stories ever, and it's great. And it has its place in, you know, the annals of great comic graphic novels and stuff, but like I was annoyed that he even bothered adapting that for Batman versus Superman. So like from the get-go, I don't think I could get behind it fully because of where Snyder's brain was. It's jumping not just to a later, you know, team up movie, but like one of the more cynical, dire stories that treats Superman like shit.
His introduction to us in Batman, if you're only watching the movies, is like old, angry, ordinary, borderline boomer, you know? It's like...
Right.
Well, we go from
Borderline boomer.
Batfleck was actually pretty good. I like the idea of Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne. He was actually pretty cool, which I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of indifferent to it when he's announced. I was like, all right, Ben Affleck just kind of does what Ben Affleck does. But I liked him. I liked him more than I thought he would. But no, I mean, when you're going in that Frank Miller wormhole, like you're just going to a relentlessly bleak place, and it's unfortunate because like Shawn, like you're saying, like feels like we keep tapping that Frank Miller well. It's like, why doesn't somebody just do The Long Halloween? Why don't we just get a standalone Batman as a detective and a cool mystery? The end. That's it.
We're getting closer. We're all going to be alive in 10 years when they reboot it again.
Right.
We keep getting closer and closer. Like the new one has the Gordon relationship. It has a bit of Long Halloween. We're getting there.
We're getting there. We are. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. The less said about the Snyder movies, the better. I'm pretty indifferent.
He said it. At Farrell Rose, director hit me to Farrell Rose.
Yeah, I'm burned out on comic book stuff, period. I remember when the Snyder movies came along, they came, I did see them, but I don't have strong opinions about them either way because they just don't, they're just kind of there. With the other movies, the Burton and the Schumacher, the Nolans, they're very specific. Snyder, I don't know. Snyder is an interesting guy. I mean, he's capable of making good stuff, but I think he gets in his way too much. I think he's indulged by the studios too much. I think he needs to be reined in by good writers and, maybe strong producers to say and certain things. Maybe you should do this instead of that and all that. But yeah, I don't know. So let's just get to the Batman because yeah. So anyway, the Batman. When that trailer dropped, I was in the same place. I don't really care about Batman anymore. I'm just burned out. There's been so many interpretations. People don't seem to be interested in making something that I'm interested in watching. Again, it felt like, okay, this is Matt Reeves. Okay, but it feels kind of, I don't know what this is. I mean, I liked his Apes movies. I didn't love them. I thought they were technical marvels. I thought there's just something about those Apes movies that just felt a little bit too sanctimonious to me in the filmmaking and what was going on. I thought, again, those are silly movies. And, Matt Reeves was treating them with a kind of reverential respect that I thought, and you should respect the movies that you're making, but the whole tone of it felt off. But I do like Matt Reeves, and I saw the Batman trailer and I was like, okay, whatever. It looks like a lot of the same stuff. It does look real and gritty and dark, but that's just boring to me at this point. So I did go see it, and I thought that on a technical level, it was the best Batman movie for me. Visually, it was fantastic. I thought it was, in the way they shot it, it almost had this sort of, what do you call it? I don't even know what you call it. It was like a milky blacks, but also kind of like contrasty, and it wasn't afraid to go almost 70s, you know what I mean? Like with the filmmaking, and it was, the stylistically was great. I thought that Pattinson did an interesting job with the character Bruce Wayne, but I don't think there was much Bruce Wayne in it. I thought when he had the suit on, he was Batman. When he had the suit off, he was Batman. I don't know if they have a plan for this, if Bruce Wayne is going to become more Bruce Wayne-ish as the series goes on. I don't know. I thought Catwoman was okay. Again, I don't have strong opinions about that. I thought she was serviceable. Zoe Kravitz. I loved Gordon. I loved Jeffrey Wright's interpretation of Gordon. I thought he was great. I loved Colin Farrell's The Riddler. The Penguin. It just shows you kind of like where my head's at with these movies. I loved Colin Farrell because there's no Colin Farrell in it. I could not recognize a dude. I'm like, is that really him? You could sort of see bits of it come out at certain points, but overall it was a very, very deep dive into that guy. Whatever, I guess they had makeup on him and things like that. Paul Dano, I don't like what they did with the Riddler. I don't know much about the comic version of this person, but I don't like how he was just this kind of like whiny. Okay, so first he was kind of like a little bit scary, over the top, and then he becomes this kind of weird, whiny, emo-ish kind of pathetic dude, which maybe makes sense in the interpretation that Matt Reeves had and trying to tie it to this sort of real world thing of online culture. But to me, he just came off as a pathetic guy. I wanted to see more of Penguin. I thought the car chase in particular with Penguin, you know, screaming and almost laughing, almost giddy like as he's being chased by Batman, as if he respects the guy. Like, oh, this guy's crazy, but fuck, this is actually kind of exciting. And oh shit, now I'm crashing. And Colin Farrell knew what movie he was making, and he just went for it, and I love that. But I just could not be bothered to care about anything going on in the Batman. I just was not emotionally affected by any of it. I watched it sort of in a passive manner. I almost fell asleep at one point. It's a 3-hour movie. You feel every inch of it. I don't particularly care for the whole putting Batman in a 7 movie thing that when I was 15, I would have loved that. Today, I don't care for it. Yeah, I don't get this sort of need to have Batman be relentlessly realistic and gritty. And now he's driving a souped up, I don't know what that was, a muscle car, like with an engine.
I prefer that to the armor tank myself. But,
I do too, yeah.
Okay,
I kind of want to hear, see, Farrell, I'm surprised I'm hearing this from you, because Batman in a different setting, because you're anti larger superhero movies, and Brittany's point to it, him not being a real superhero, it just being a crime movie, I thought you'd take to it a little easier. So.
Well, the thing is, yeah, like I like those aspects of the movie. Like I thought, but this is the thing. This is the context I always have to put this in. I don't want Batman in those movies. I'm not a reader of the comic book, so maybe there's some more meat there that I'm missing, but I'm seeing movies where, okay, this is just a detective or something. Okay, cool. Like, but this is like a guy dressed as a flying mouse who, you know, and it's just, I don't know, just does not work for me. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's a well-made, probably pretty good movie. I just can't be bothered at this point to care. I'm just kind of past it, but those are my overall thoughts about it. I mean, I have some more things maybe that I'm forgetting, but I'll let y'all.
Brittany,
yeah,
wow, I'm fascinating because I loved it. I mean, that's the brief thing. It had I had issues with it for sure, just like I did with The Dark Knight, but overall, like, I mean, it was just a movie that speaks to my personal heart and aesthetic. I love neo-noir, rain, you know, like a long slog, like slow pace, love it. Slow motion, him walking through crime scenes, love it, love it, love it. Use the Nirvana song as much as you want. Makes me feel smart and ethereal.
You're gonna pay for it. Keep using it.
I think, although their Batman theme, the score did get old after a while, and that's probably because it was a 3-hour-long movie. Loved the costume design. Loved Colin Farrell's Penguin. Can't wait to see more of that. Glad they're making it into a series. That makes total sense. He was delightful. That was a totally passable Catwoman. I can get on board with that. Like, there was nothing that necessarily jumped out about, you know, her, but I also appreciate that all of these characters we know are coming back for the most part. I wish John Turturro hadn't died, because his Carmine Falcone was amazing. I thought all of the casting was like on the nose. Bruce Wayne was such an emo potato, I could care less. I was like, come on, man. I appreciated that he was recluse, right? Because anybody that driven and like vengeful would not be a playboy at all. You know, like there would be no two sides. He would be this weird, freakish, afraid of the daylight, goth, you know, freaky guy who's just like hates everything. And so like I appreciated that take on it. Again, talking about what they might do in the future, I think I felt as a viewer at the end of this movie, there was this realization as Batman, Bruce Wayne, that like there needed to be symbols of hope, and that he maybe could be that as Bruce Wayne instead of just being an emo potato all the time. I appreciated that he made all his own stuff or whatever, but again, like it doesn't need to be too realistic. Before going into the movie, my friend was with me because again, I bought 9 seats so that I could take all of my friends on opening night. Nice. And you know, my friend was sitting there and we were talking about Paul Dano's Riddler, and he's like, I haven't seen his costume. And I said, spoiler alert, it's fucking stupid. And then I watched the movie and it made more sense in the context of the movie. It was super dark and realistic, but I love Seven, you know, like give me a David Fincher murder mystery or just anything that's Korean thriller, you know, like I love that if it's dark. So I was willing to like buy into that, even though, you know, you're right, he was kind of sad and pathetic, but I think most of those guys are. I kind of sad, maybe not so much pathetic, but sad in a lot of ways. I loved Gordon. I loved that he was a detective. I love that there was this weird sense of voyeurism. I liked that my partner was like, I didn't like the romance. I was like, what romance? I was like, there was no romance. You know, Zoe Kravitz as Selena Kyle was using what her skill set, which is she was, you know, a prostitute or a lady of the night or things like that. She's using her skill set to get from men what she knows how to get. Batman's a man. Like it didn't feel sexy to me because I don't think it was. I think it was transactional, but I also feel like that's something they could build on. Like there's something there, but like, because it felt forced because it was. I don't think it was natural in that moment. I think she was using that against him. Also, my partner said that there were no stakes in this movie, and he is a Spider-Man fan and a Marvel Universe fan. I was like, you cannot say there's no stakes in this movie and love Marvel movies. It's completely an invalid argument. He was like, yeah, but the world's at stake. I'm like, fuck off. Like, I love that Batman is just relentless in this movie. You know, I appreciate that, like, there at the end, he like shoots himself up with venom or whatever. And it's just like, I like that it went on too long in some regard, but I like that, like, he falls into the water. Okay, cut to the end of the movie. No, he comes out of the water. He's helping people out of the wreckage. And it's like, it's really driving home that this character is relentless. And that's nuts, bananas, because you're not supposed to be like that. That's, you know, that's literally like, it's kind of heightening his own insanity of like, to be this person, you know, is its own sickness in a lot of ways. And that's why he's, I guess, so emo the rest of the time. But, you know, like, there was just so many things. I loved his cape. And, you know, I was like, I didn't think I was going to be into it. For the most part, I liked the costume design overall. And I was okay with Paul Dano's Riddler outfit. You know, it was funny, my friend mentioned this and I kind of see what she's saying. She's like, I feel like Paul Dano was a little, as a casting choice, was a little too on the nose. I was like, she's like, I would have rather seen someone more interesting. And I was like, fair. But you know, like, yeah, you give me a dark noir thriller serial killer movie and it's gonna immediately be speaking to something I already like. And then you add that I already like Batman. And so I feel like I was just primed to really like this movie, even though I wasn't anticipating it. When the trailer came out, I eye rolled. I was like, oh God, like, can we make Batman any darker? And then turns out I was okay with it, that I really enjoyed it. And it had moments of levity, which I appreciated. But you have to do that in any of those movies. Yeah, and then Greg Fraser, I just can't feel like we can walk out of this without talking about his DP work, because like a lot of those shots were just, I felt like I just wanted to like lick them off the screen or whatever. So yeah, that's me gushing about it. For sure it has issues, but I love that the villains are still alive for the most part. I love that they didn't lose. I love that the Riddler successfully blew up all that stuff. It wasn't like, you know, in the Dark Knight where, you know, Batman does save the day. I'm like so grateful. I'm always like, oh, does the superhero or does like the hero always have to win? Boring, you know, because there is a huge part of me and a society that we love to kind of root for villains, you know? So being able to make that, it seems like they're making the universe more rich in that regard, to where there can be long-term storytelling, is exciting to me, because that was some of the issues I had with the, you know, other ones. It's like, oh, they get one movie, you know, which is to say that at the end of Batman Returns, Catwoman is there, you know, so like she had one life left, you know, and that was kind of setting that up, which was nice. And then the Joker lives at the end of the Dark Knight, but, you know, just because of capitalism and unforeseen, you know, circumstances and things, those never got to be explored. And so I'm looking forward to like actually exploring characters. So as Matt Reeves has said, like, you know, the Joker in this movie isn't the Joker yet. He's just a criminal that he's encountered on the street. He hasn't like embraced his character yet. And so I love that that's being set up for the future and it's not being overly pushed in our face, and probably won't even be, hopefully won't even be the main villain in the next movie. So I love the idea of it taking its time. Sorry, Farrell, but yeah, 7 movies, sure. Give me an HBO Max series. The whole time I was like, why can't this just be a series, you know? And that was partly because I wanted to see these characters around a lot more. So maybe it was because I had low expectation. I still saw it on opening night because I'm a Batman fan. But I had low expectations and it met those. And I think some of my friends even liked it a lot more than I did. And I'm definitely going to go see it again, just for nothing else. Just the cinematography was, like I said, was right up my alley. Yeah, that was my initial gushing. And I'm sure y'all will say things that I totally agree with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more in the Farrell camp, and I'll explain some things that I saw that maybe Farrell would agree with. But like, there's 2 halves I feel like to this movie. The one half, and this is for any cinematic experience, is really, it's like a story level, and there's the cinema level. And granted, they should overlap. Like story is part of the cinematic experience. But when you talk about cinematic experience, in my mind, I'm talking about like the things that you talk about, Brittany, is like the cinematography, the score, the overall feeling, the everything that happened in that movie was done so remarkably well. Like, it's so good. It's so good to look at. And granted, I liked the Batman. I liked the movie. I didn't love it. But like, in terms of just the cinema aspect, like just sitting there watching it, if you turn the sound off, I'd be like, damn. Like, wow, there's a lot of great set pieces. The chase is awesome. The costume's awesome. The fight scenes, just Batman is just like a brute and just beating people down. He doesn't even tie them up to be arrested. He just goes around beating people up, I guess, like, which is kind of awesome, but on the other hand, I had the same problem with stakes. And I'll explain in a few different ways. Like, for instance, the Penguin car chasing. There's no stakes. Like, in matter of fact, I'll say this. You could have removed, I loved Colin Farrell portrayal as the Penguin. I didn't think I did. I was like, oh God, he's like cosplaying Al Capone in The Untouchables. Like, this is the most boring Penguin I can imagine.
And doing De Niro.
Yeah, he's just doing De Niro. Yeah. And I loved his character and I loved how he portrayed him. You could have removed him from the movie completely and lost nothing. Like, he played no integral part of the movie. The whole car chase is they chase him down finally. Batman, Gordon corner him and learn nothing. All they learned is they wrong, thinking that he was he was a red herring. That's it. That's all they
learned
get
Spanish from him.
They learned a little Spanish. They learned La Rata, which is like the world's greatest detective. Like, you did, come on, man. But there is just, you look at the movie, and it's something that, like, I was talking about with friends today. It's like, a serial killer movie works, or even serial killers in general work. The reason serial killers are scary in their advent in the 60s and 70s is that, like, they're randomized, even though they may have their own internal logic that may kind of make sense to us, most likely does not. It was like random. The Zodiac killer was like random, like that's the terrifying thing, where crime and murder before was limited to like crimes of passion or revenge, or just locked within criminal society. The serial killer was like, anybody can die, and that was terrifying in the suburbs, in the city, wherever. It didn't feel like a serial killer to me. Like, Riddler had really specific targets and very unsympathetic targets. It's like, oh no, these corrupt, rich white dudes are getting killed. If only a vigilante could save us. It's like, who cares? Like, he kind of is the vigilante. Like there was no sense of of urgency to like, man, this has got to stop. It's like, and the more the movie went on, the more when we learned what these guys were guilty of, it's like they fleeced the city, screwed over orphans. It's like, I don't feel like I needed, yes, murder is bad. Batman, somebody should do something about that. But it wasn't like the city was in the grips of terror. It was just these really bad, crappy dudes were getting murdered to getting what they deserved, But the weirdest thing about that, though, is that I felt like there was 3 sections to the Riddler stories, like that kind of masquerading serial killer story. Then he disappears from the movie for like 40 minutes. Like, he's not even in it while we're doing Falcone stuff, which I didn't think really worked at all. Like, I think that was worst part of the story. I love Turturro. That was the worst part of the story. They're trying to do this like parallel. Zoe Kravitz lost her mom and Bruce lost his parents. Are kind of the same, but they don't really do anything with it, you know? So, and that ended up being like, not quite a red herring, but not a whole lot of weight there. And then the Riddler comes back and then there's stakes, but it felt like the Riddler serial killer thing, while these targets were, like I said, low stakes, not really sympathetic or whatever, it was setting up this whole Thomas Wayne thing, you know, like, and we had this like adjacent Batman origin story that we didn't need. And then it was just much ado about nothing because Thomas Wayne had nothing to do with it. The only purpose was to kind of insert Batman's parents into there. And then like, once you get that out of the way, then Riddler felt like he became more threatening. Like he actually had a plot for the city and he had all this other stuff going on. And when that third act, it's like, ooh, now the Riddler feels, I liked him before, but it's like now he feels interesting and he feels scary and there's something bigger going on. It got a little Nolan-y at the end, I feel like. But like, it felt like finally there's stuff going on, but that's like, I don't know, 2 hours and 20 minutes into the movie. Like this is a movie that could have been cut by 40 minutes. Easily. And it's unfortunate because as great as the technical stuff is, like this should have been like The Dark Knight, something that's more so, you know, intense. It should have been an intense and riveting thing. And there was the elements there and the moments there, but I felt like it kept losing its own momentum because you had these things that just didn't go anywhere and didn't matter. And just, you know, these lulls and it goes and it's lulls and it goes. And it's like, there was just too much excess and it undermined its own purpose of being a thriller. And it wasn't very thrilling. So I think that I loved the way it was shot. I loved that it was made and I loved the portrayal of Batman, but like that story and that script was, I felt very weak. And I felt like they were trying to do stuff that was unnecessary, didn't have the best stakes. And that kind of took away from the whole of what this thing could have been.
Yeah, I saw an interesting point somebody made about Batman, and I didn't know this. I mean, I kind of knew it, but not being a reader of the comics, I kind of, you know, wasn't in the forefront of my mind. But in this movie, Batman seems to rush headlong in a lot of things. Like he goes into that club, rushing into guys, and the point made was like, where's the subterfuge? You know what I mean? Of Batman, where's the I mean, would Batman really just charge headlong into people firing machine guns at him and stuff like that? Which I think, Michael, we talked before, I think you made a point that, you know, when you're taking gunfire like that, it would knock you back. And
Yes.
he just kind of, and it's like, why aren't they shooting him in the face? You know, things. This is the problem with when these movies get to this point, is because you start, and this takes me out of the movie because it's like, okay, just shoot him in the face. You know what I mean? Like, because he's got it exposed.
It's like the World War Z.
Really?
Yeah. It's like World War Z, where like all like you see like the zombies all like fall like 50 feet and they get up and run. It's like, look, if your legs are broken and they don't work, it doesn't matter if you are undead. Like the bones just don't work. Like, that's like
Yeah, it's like, and it's like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And in a film interpretive world, I get it. Like, you know, it's a movie, you know, there's going to be stuff that just doesn't make sense, because movies are just sort of an encapsulation of certain dramatic things or things you're trying to dramatize. I get it. But when the entire foundation of your movie is built on, again, a billionaire who's, you know, dressing as a bat, he's got all these toys, and you know, he's going out in the night and doing this. I was like, and then Batman gets to the top of this building and the police is like, says, when is this dude afraid of heights? Like, he gets to the edge and he's kind of like, he's like, oh shit, like he looks scared. You know what I mean? Like, and again, I don't know. I always assumed that Batman was just kind of comfortable with heights. So that kind of threw me off. I don't know if that was just something that Reeves was kind of throwing in as like, oh, he's not quite as experienced, or and I kind of felt that, but I'm like, to what degree is he trying to do this? Because again, with the Bruce Wayne interpretation, it's like he takes off the suit. He's an emo guy to me. That's the way he felt. Like, he's a depressed billionaire guy. He's got no life really. And the point of the Batman character, I thought, was, and maybe Reeves will get to this, but I thought the point of the Batman character was Bruce Wayne is a mask, the face that he puts onto the world to let people know that I'm not Batman. I couldn't be, because I'm just sort of this dumb billionaire guy, not dumb, but just this billionaire guy who's just kind of this like, again, Keaton played it great, and aloof, kind of like, oh, I got all this money, but I don't know what to do with it. And Batman ends up being really how he expresses his real self. And with this interpretation, whether it's valid or not, I don't know, because I don't know much about the comics, but it seemed to me that when he took off the suit, he was still in that mode where he was really wanting to like, just, or he was just like, just depressed and, kind of moody and just, and his relationship with Alfred. And that was another thing. I didn't think anybody in this movie had chemistry. Except for Batman and Gordon were great. Everybody else, it felt like there was just no chemistry going on. Like the Alfred and Bruce Wayne relationships of the past, I thought worked a lot better. I thought this version, it just did not work for me. I didn't feel any connection between these two guys when Alfred's in his hospital bed.
It's like a teenager. You're not my dad, Alfred.
Yeah.
Get out of my Batcave, man.
I didn't feel, I just felt like, Matt Reeves, you want me to feel like something here, and I just don't, because there's no chemistry. There's just, and apparently I think Nicholas Hoult or something, Hoult, I can't remember his last name, was up for the Bruce Wayne Batman role, but the studio really wanted Pattinson, and I think they also wanted Kristen Stewart for Catwoman because of that Twilight connection. But thankfully, I think Reeves kind of
too much Twilight.
Yeah, I think the way that Pattinson was playing it, again, it's tough, because it's like, okay, he's playing an isolated dude, kind of depressed over his, he's still got that guilt or whatever it is. He's not letting anybody in. I get that, but Alfred was supposed to be the one guy who gets him, and they're close, and I don't know, it just felt like, okay, he really is just his butler, because that's the way it feels. You know what I mean? Like, and then I didn't feel any chemistry between him and Catwoman. I didn't feel any chemistry between Batman and Gordon. Was good. I thought that worked for the most part. I like that part of the movie. I think they worked well together. But yeah, I mean, it was just, the story didn't grab me. The relationship didn't grab me. I didn't feel any stakes. It was just a very pretty, well done on a production value movie, which God bless him, but I really was missing a lot of the whole, like, why should I care about what's going on? But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I think that Matt Reeves' The Batman is probably a good movie. I do want to see it again, but the first time was just not, and it's just the length is inexcusable to me. There's just no reason for it. I mean, you could have made, why not just make, and it's the first movie, like, why would the first movie be 3 hours? Like, that just makes no sense to me. I understand conclusions where you're trying to, like, tie everything together. I get when those movies are long, but to me, that just made no sense that the first movie was 3 hours. I'm like Michael said, you could have easily cut 40 minutes out. I feel like you could have cut an hour out of it, and just brought it down to this core thing. But yeah, no, I'm obviously not as up on it as some people. I think online I still think it's pretty popular. I mean, Shawn was saying that there's some division online.
Well, I hear Shawn. What is Shawn? Did you like
only on this call? I'm on Britney's side. Yeah, I'm actually shocked both of you guys had some of the issues you had. So I went and saw it a second time because we knew we were doing this show, and I wanted to kind of confirm or deny or figure out exactly how I felt about it. I came out of it really liking it the first time, and I came out of it really liking it the second time. Now, stuff Michael said is not. I'm not going to argue like the points. He's not wrong about some of the way the Riddler stuff was played out, though. To Brittany's point, though, it did feel like it could have been one of those 6 hour, split across short run TV series. I don't mind when stuff's got layers like that. I don't think I would have liked the movie as much if it was a bare bones thing. I do agree that Catwoman having the parallel was unnecessary. Like, we're in a world now where the Waynes are always tied into Gotham, and the villains are going to be tied into Bruce and stuff like that. A little too much, I agree, on Michael's point. Like, not every Spider-Man villain needs to be one of his teachers that takes the serum and turns into a monster. Like, I get it. Not every Batman villain needs to be an answer to Batman. But in this case with the Riddler, it tied in. Having all that tie in, I didn't need Catwoman's tie-in to be, it could have just been, hey, I'm really trying to help my friend who got killed, but also, you killed my mom. Also, you're my dad. Like, that was like hat on a hat type thing.
Yeah.
That probably wasn't necessary. I don't disagree with that. But yeah, the stuff with, and also Farrell, to your point, he's in year 2. I very much think a lot of that stuff is he's not comfortable with all of it yet. He's not Bruce Wayne yet. And actually seeing it the second time really confirmed that this movie is setting up Bruce Wayne's origin. It 100% leads you to, at the end, him saying, I'll go backwards, actually. Sorry. I love the opening scene. He's very much doing a Rorschach monologue where he's teetering on the edge of going too far. I freaking love the scene where they're just looking into dark alleyways and looking into dark halls and thinking he's there. That's the thing I wanted to see in a Batman movie forever.
Loved it.
But the monologue at the end of the movie is juxtaposed to that, because he's now realizing, oh shoot, I can do more than just install fear. I can install hope. And he's saying Bruce has to come out now, to the point where I actually thought there was so much news footage in this movie that I thought at the end you'd actually hear like a little voiceover saying like, the Wayne Foundation, dormant for years, has donated 10 million to like help fix the flooding, or like, I thought I was actually getting that close to him. But you kind of understand that Bruce has changed and saying like, I'm going to let the National Guard come in and do their job, and I'm going to also install hope, not just fear. And you kind of see that like when he's a literal beacon, a red beacon at the end, when he's like helping those people, he reaches for them. They're afraid of him because he's done nothing but install fear in the city for like 2 years. So like it was even like they were hesitant to even take his hand. So I think he's changing in that third act very much, and you're going to see like Bruce Wayne's origin in part 2, where right now, yes, he's the recluse, yes, he's emo. He knows he has to put on the mask, as you said, in part 2. I think we'll see a lot more corporate Bruce. I hope we see Court of Owls that would lean right into all that, seeing Bruce as a forefront. I don't need to see. The one scene I outright disliked in this movie was the Joker tease. I did not need that whatsoever. That felt like a post-credit scene that got wedged in the movie. And I heard that there's another shot with him, and that made that make a little more sense, I guess, that he'd already been seen in the asylum. But even when he says the line about something about a clown, you could have cut right there, but they kept talking. They kept laughing, and I'm like, oh, put this in the end credits. Like, I got it. But other than that, I didn't outright dislike any of it. I love that he's in year 2. I love that he and Gordon have a trust and a relationship. It's cool to see him walking through crime scenes and stuff, and like cops not being easy with him even being there. And even to a point where they're like in a shoving match in one of the holding cells, I think, at one point.
That was a great scene.
But, yeah, things like that.
Whispering to each other heatedly. All right, and you're gonna drink the key, and then you're gonna loved it.
Yeah, the atmosphere overall, and the fact that it is just him solving a case with Gordon, like it was stuff I've wanted to see in a Batman movie for a long time. So
yeah, on the surface, in the different elements, I thought on the surface I like them, but to me, just the integration of everything it just didn't work for me. But I'm one of those people who can acknowledge something's good, but it just doesn't work for me. I mean, there are movies, especially Batman movies, that are the same way. But again, like I said, I think that this did feel like it was kind of setting it up, because it did feel off. I'm like, well, I thought Bruce Wayne was this. And now that I think about it, it does feel like they are setting up that he has to sort of rise and, be effective in a different way. So no, totally.
Yeah, but it's funny because what Shawn says is what I love. And if I regret anything, is it was like a bookend, like, and I don't see like the end he changes. I wish they would have like cut off some other parts, like, he's got to deal with his parents' death again, and he's got to go over here. He's got to, can he trust Catwoman? Like, who, by the way, I thought Zoe Kravitz was amazing. Her that and Kimmy, like, she has like killed 2 movies this year, like incredible. But like, if they would have made it more like lose a little bit, focused on what Shawn said, exactly that lesson, that year 2 Batman. Learn that lesson, and then he comes out that other side, and had that lesson be more clear, like a straight trajectory, where it was kind of like a like it's like if they would have done that and just had a little bit more focus on a single thing, I think it would have been superb. Like, it's just like a little leaner, a little more focused, and I think you would have had it. Like, I just, because I see that same thing, I'm like, man, that is super cool. And I just, I got kind of lost in like this miasma of like tons of other stuff that's just kind of there.
I feel like I definitely agree with like it needed to be leaner. We can't talk about Snyder needing an editor and this movie not needing an editor for sure. Like it definitely could use some edits to like no movie needs to be 3 hours long. If it's 3 hours long, it should be a television show. I hate long movies. That was one of the things that I had like knocked against it immediately going in. So the fact that it kept my interest was nice. But also, what is it that you just said? It definitely needed an editor. I don't know. Farrell, you go.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I do want to wrap it up at some point, but I just want to say the last couple things. Like Catwoman, Zoe Kravitz is good. She's hampered by the fact that Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman cannot be beaten. That's the only thing. It's Michelle Pfeiffer's interpretation of Catwoman is just
I don't know
too.
if I feel that way anymore.
It's amazing. It's great, and I feel like the reason that I'm not saying she's not. I just thought she was decent. I mean, I don't think she's bad, but I'm just like, when in a world where Michelle Pfeiffer played that character, I'm just kind of like, okay, whatever. But and then also the what was I gonna say? I think about the God, brain fart. Anyway, but do you guys have any final thoughts about any of the Batman movies?
I agree that Alfred got shortchanged in this one. There could have been 1 to 2 more scenes, and even that, it ended with, "Oh, I need to treat you differently. You really are family." Like, we probably could have used one more bit where they bond. Toward the end. To Michael's point, there's some stuff where it feels like a lot of stuff set for part 2 that they probably could have just alluded to a little harder toward the end of this one. But overall, I mean, like I said, I liked it. My second viewing, I liked it as much. I'm curious if you guys see it a second time, if you soften on it at all. But my final thoughts, just he was inspired by random things, like Penguin's a bit of Fredo from Godfather, and Riddler's a bit of Zodiac Killer, and he's inspired by Fincher and '70s movies, and the tone's even a little bit of Long Halloween in Year One. So all that cumulatively made for a satisfying Batman movie for me. But I'm not disagreeing with some of your guys' drawbacks to it either. It's just
it's in my top 3 for sure. I don't know which would be. The Dark Knight and Batman Returns are my 1 and 2, and I don't know which order. And then this is top 3 for me. I think it's just, and again, it might be one of those Batman Begins thing. Like, if we'd gone back to, we were having this conversation right after Begins came out, I might have said the same things. And I think it's just because, one, it did a lot of things really well, but I think, and this could totally shoot me in the foot, but like, it set up a lot of things I'm excited for, which is also, so like, I'm excited for a future, which is, I mean, it's something powerful to say if a movie can do that. But it is also part of what's so exciting about it is what I'm anticipating to come as a result. I totally agree with all of y'all's critiques. Those were all spot on. And again, I think this might come back to, like, we'll see how it ages with time, but it might be one of those Dark Knight things where, like, when I go back and I really see what I love about that movie, there was a lot of things that I didn't like about it, but I just don't even remember those things, and I'm only focusing on the things that I really liked and the excitement that it's built in me for what's to come. But yeah, thanks for having me on. This was awesome. Love Batman movies.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to talk about it with somebody.
Michael, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, it's funny, like for same thing for me. The Batman is, there's 10 Batman movies that we discussed, and I think there's 5 very good ones, and then there's 5 other ones. It's in there. It's like I said, there's the 2 sides to the coin of the experience, like the story and the cinema. And sometimes the cinema can be all there is. You could look at like something like 2001. Not much of a story, like there is, but it's a cinematic experience first and foremost. And if you're down with that, it's you recognize one of the greatest movies of all time. But like Batman has a similar thing. Everybody I've talked to about it, it's been like filmmaker friends who are like, you're not wrong, I just don't care. Like all the other stuff worked for me so well. And I'm like, no, that's cool, because like you guys are saying, and I appreciate that you recognize what I'm saying that I didn't like. The things that you liked, I totally recognize. I think those things are great. I just I couldn't get past that as the writer. Like, I can't get past that story stuff where I'm like, oh, if you just, sharpen that a little bit better and a little bit more. But no, I mean, it's funny. We've had, like I said, 10 Batman movies since 1989. So it's not too tight. You look at, there's been about 300 Spider-Man movies in like 6 years. So it's not bad that was the Batman run, but I'm certainly looking forward to more from Matt Reeves. I love him as a filmmaker. And I like the idea that we're going to spend time in this universe. I like the idea that the DC cinematic universe has flexibility towards this, that you don't have to be telling one singular story, that we can just tell this Batman and maybe another Batman exists. In fact, we do know other Batmans exist in different iterations, and they're over there and this is over here, and we can kind of run with this. And I'm excited for more of those stories. I don't want to see the Joker right away. Please don't do the Joker in part 2. Please.
He said he wasn't going to. That really was just a tease, so that's encouraging. I don't want him in 2 or 3. I'd like to see something different. Like I said, Court of Owls would be a great new wrinkle in live action.
I agree, and that's something you can even like do in like a big like TV that could, because that's such a big conspiracy. You can do tons of stuff to open that up. So
yeah, if that Penguin series takes off, maybe they will greenlight another kind of version that ties into this universe.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, especially now Peacemaker, another spin-off doing so well,
incredibly well.
Maybe there's more, but I'm looking forward to it. As much as I had some issues with the Batman, I really did appreciate it and admire it, and I definitely want to see more. And I'll see this one again too.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I'm kind of tired of seeing the same villains too. I mean, we're 10 movies in, and where's Killer Croc? Where's Clayface? And you know what I mean? I know again, I don't read the comics much, but I do kind of know there's a pretty big rogues gallery, I think, of villains. I'm just kind of tired of seeing studios rely on this same. Okay, like we've seen the Joker, we get it. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like I get that he and the Joker and Batman are almost tied together in terms of their, it's like a symbiotic relationship. But there are other villains. We get really cool villains. Like I love the Batman in the animated series, and one of the reasons is that they weren't afraid to put Clayface in a very moody, atmospheric, series with Batman. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, where's the movie version of this? But I do remember what I was going to say. It was the length. I do like. I think it depends. Like I love The Godfather. In that movie, I can't imagine that movie being 2 hours. You know what I mean, or 90 minutes. But depends on the context. I think longer superhero movies are just, and they're trending longer, which just annoys the hell out of me, because it just shows that. Where's the editors? Where are the writers? Like, you know what I mean? Part of writing is editing. It's like it's being concise and using cinema to make great big points in a small way, concise way. A lot of actors can act a scene and really distill what's important about the scene in one line. But now movies, you have an actor say tons of dialogue about something they could have said in one line. But yeah, I really do want to get back to shorter, big budget, superhero films. So, but hopefully, yeah, I am looking forward to the next Batman. I'm interested to see if the promise of the first Batman, especially in terms of Bruce Wayne, is going to be filled out. And I hope I do care. I want to see some chemistry. I want to see something like that. And I really enjoyed the conversation, I really appreciate you giving your thoughts on the Batman series.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. This is a lot of fun to talk with you guys. So thank you all for letting me be here. This is great.
Yeah, same.
Enjoyed it. Thanks to you guys for crapping on Britney's in my favorite movie of the past.
Anytime, man.
Anytime. It was a good talk.
Divided right down the
middle. We're all talking. We love Dark Knight too. We can't not be critical of it. Like there's nothing that's above reproach and criticism. So it's we criticize the stuff we love because we love it. So we can point out the flaws. But yeah, maybe you guys will soften on it too. Like, hey, I never thought I'd love the prequel films. Then my son got really into Star Wars, and now I've found a newfound appreciation. So anything is possible if you believe
I love the
in yourself.
Yeah, we'll definitely
I do too now because watching Clone Wars and stuff with him.
We'll definitely have to do a roundtable on those at some point too.
Oh boy.
Star Wars has always been a mixed bag, and when people realize that, they can appreciate it more. It's always been half good, half awful.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, I do got to
tangenting away.
But we want to wrap this up, Shawn.
Yeah, thank you guys, everybody, for joining us. And I don't know why Farrell's pitching to me other than I host the pod and an outro sometimes. But we appreciate you guys checking out this roundtable, and look for it on our YouTube page along with Farrell's Cinemechanic video essays, which are fantastic. We have some interviews from the Paper Street podcast on there, as well as some of our film trailers. soon to be a revealer trailer up there on that page. We'll talk about that with Michael down the road here. But we're looking forward to that.
Nice.
But yeah, thank you for checking us out. Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, sorry.
Take care, guys.